I'm Steve Chesler. I'm chair of the Environmental Protection Committee. Welcome to our meeting here on November 29th, 6:30 p.m. We have 3 items on the agenda tonight. 470 Kent Avenue, Brownfield Cleanup Program, and the stormwater storm risk management draft proposal from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And then we're revisiting the BSA application for 315 Berry Street for a installation, getting a special permit to install a battery storage system on the roof of their building. So first, we'll do a quick roll call. Let's get up my sheet here. Oh, okay, Steve Chesler here. Eric Brusadas.
I'm here.
Hey, Eric.
Hi.
Corey Canton. Katie Danny Horowitz. Yoel Lowe. Trina McKeever.
I'm here.
Hey, Trina. Janice Peterson. Bella Sable. William Vega.
Here.
Hey, William.
Pleasure.
Laura Hoffman.
Here.
Kevin Costa. And Kay Stewart. Okay. Yep, we're a bit short of a quorum, but we're going to move right on. So first up, we'll have a presentation from New York State Department of Environmental Conservation regarding the Brownfield Cleanup Program at 470 Kent Avenue. And then after that, we'll field some questions, make comments, and then the committee will discuss the item and decide whether we want to submit a comment. So without further ado, Gerald Pratt from DEC, if you do you have a presentation to share?
I think Jerry is muted.
Sorry, I was just talking to myself, apparently. I'm just making sure I can share my screen with
Okay.
you. I have a presentation, yes.
Great.
Okay. All right. Let's see if this works.
Okay.
Right.
We can see that.
Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Perfect. Great. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for allowing me to present this to you. It's just an overview of the current. Well, let me introduce myself. My name is Jerry Pratt. I'm with New York State DEC. I'm the current project manager for the 470 Kent Ave Brownfield site. And just a real quick update, we are currently in the midst of a public review of the submitted remedial action work plan that's been out for public comment for 3 weeks or so, and it'll be again that public comment period will, I think, end the middle of December. So hopefully this helps you out, those comments.
And Jerry, might I just interject and say that this is Kira Thompson from DEC also. I want to just make it clear that the department is still accepting comments. They can be written they can be presented to us here. Although I don't think we want to spend a lot of time on everyone's comments, but they can be submitted in writing to the department via Jerry, who I believe will share his contact information at the end of the presentation.
Okay, yeah, if we have a comments, a committee sanctioned comment for the agency, we will basically submit that to the full board, which will vote on that in the first week of December, and then we would submit it soon thereafter, like usually right after. So hopefully that'll still be okay.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks, Kira. All right, so the site is located on the East River down in Williamsburg area, just outside of the Navy Yard and the Waldout Channel. There's a picture of the site, an overview, a blown out picture. And then moving into the site, a little more info about that. It's approximately just over 3.5 acres in size. It consists of 2 parcels. And it's recently vacant. It previously housed a lumber yard and kind of a retail space as well, and 2 buildings. And those are recently demolished and is currently under construction. Okay, so the volunteer for the BCP site is recently 470 Kent Ave Associates. There's been a few of them over time. This is the recent one. As of 2019, they are the applicant and moving forward with the development. They proposed a track 4 cleanup, which is restricted use cleanup as an end product with site-specific soil cleanup objectives. And at a minimum, the top 2 feet of those shallow soils would be stripped and removed to meet restricted residential soil cleanup objectives. The applicant is proposing a redevelopment in 3 buildings, or as 3 buildings. They are 3 residential towers of varying heights, the highest being 29. And I guess some of the lower areas or the first floors or some will be retail space. They're also proposing some public waterfront access. And these areas, the shaded areas on this picture represent construction excavation in different phases. The green areas proposed for 9 to 19 feet of excavation, blue 1 to 7 feet, the beige, I guess, 9 to 19, and then there's a dark a brown area along the Wallabout Channel for excavation and installation of a new bulkhead to replace a failed one. And before I get into the actual remedial actions, all remedies must meet our basic generic remedial objectives. And we have them proposed for each of the media that's being remediated here. So we have groundwater, soil, and soil vapor. And I'll just go into those. So these are just generic remedial action objectives that all brownfield program applicants must meet in their remedies and remedial actions. So there's public health and environmental protection here to satisfy. And again, for soil, similar bullet points to satisfy public health protection and environmental protection again. So we're basically reducing the exposures and exposure pathways to the people, environment, and any ecological exposures. And then we also are dealing with soil vapor to reduce or eliminate that from being exposure pathway to people. So all of the remedies and remedial actions will address those objectives. So so we have a number of remedial actions already in progress at the site, and we've called those interim remedial measures, as well as the ones that are going to be are proposed currently in our remedial action work plan. So I'll go over the current ones first. So the first IRM that's in progress, the applicant has proposed removal of 2 underground storage tanks, and those were located in a pink area in the middle of the site. There's also petroleum contaminated soil beneath those USTs that were removed as part of that IRM. And 2 other actions that were completed to complete the remedial IRM portions were the demolition of those on-site buildings and then the installation of the new bulkhead. Another current remedial measure that's in progress is phase 1 construction. That was mentioned earlier. One of the building footprints is currently being excavated. The remedial aspect of that is to meet our track 4 cleanup is the removal of 2 feet across the building footprint. And then the rest of the excavation that's currently undergoing is related to construction and so they can install the basement and footings and foundation of that building. There's also a small area in the lower corner to address some additional contamination that was deeper than that 2-foot remedial excavation to address some high levels of contamination in that one area around BMW2. Also part of that interim remedial measure is when they're finished excavating down to their construction depths, they also must meet our remedial cleanup standards for the site, which is either restricted residential or protection of groundwater. So they must perform confirmatory sampling in this grid here that's laid out per our standards, and all of their endpoint sampling results must meet our standards, cleanup objectives for the site. And that brings me to the current remedial action work plan that's been proposed and is up for public comment. So this is in addition to the 2 interim remedial measures. So there's additional soil, and I'll go over each of these bullet points in some subsequent slides. But they're proposing additional soil excavation. They're going to treat the petroleum contamination with an oxygen release compound. They're also treating all groundwater that's needed to attain their construction depths, construction excavation depths. All that groundwater must be treated through an on-site groundwater treatment plant. Their foundations will have a waterproofing system kind of installed around the footings and basement area of that all of the buildings that are going to be proposed. And then finally, when that's done, they're going to cover the site with, in addition to, wherever they have soil exposed, all of that soil must meet our restricted residential soil cleanup objectives. And again, they're also going to install that bulkhead. And then finally, they're going to develop a remedial, an environmental easement for the property that'll be filed with the parcel. And then they'll also be under site management because they must meet, all of the remedial objectives. So they have to make sure that the cover system stays in place. They have to maintain any groundwater. All the groundwater that's leaving the site must meet standards as well. So that'll be covered in the site management plan. All right, so getting into the wrap a little bit further. So the remedial excavations, in addition to their construction, kind of overlaid their that construction plan. So you see this faint green area, the beige, the blue, and then the bulkhead area kind of overlaid on top of this thing. So in addition to those excavation areas, there's these darker shaded areas. That's additional remedial excavation where soil samples have demonstrated they need to take out this soil to meet those soil cleanup objectives. So those are going to be deeper excavation areas or outside the excavation, the construction excavations. And again, they must, they have to have endpoint samples in addition to verify that what they've taken out and what they propose to leave behind meets the standard. And again, just I showed previously the endpoint sampling detail for the IRM. This is the endpoint sampling detail for the RAP. So it covers the remaining area of the site. So again, these are all confirmation samples that will demonstrate that what they've completed meets our standard, and what they're, what the proposed bottoms will also, whatever's underneath the construction excavations will also meet the standard as well. And then when everything's all done, they're going to install some groundwater monitoring to demonstrate that all of the remediation excavations are effective and that no further groundwater contamination would be leaving the site, and that would be towards the East River. So each of these groundwater wells represents either hotspots or just upgrading, downgrading areas, just to verify that the site in itself is performing properly. And again, this is just a little detail about where the petroleum excavation was and where the oxygen release compound treatment will take place in this green area. And that's it. That's the remedial actions and that were proposed for in the RAP. And if you have any questions, please feel free.
Great, thank you, Gerald, for that. Really appreciate it. Before I forget, could you please send us a copy of the presentation file so we can include it in our report?
Sure.
Great. So, I guess prior to this site housing a lumber yard, it was, I guess, part of a manufactured gas plant. Was a part of the
Yes.
plant that that used to exist at 500 Kent. Is it part of that?
Yeah, this picture here, I'll just. It's a better picture. Yeah, any of these, I apologize for not pointing that out. All of the original manufactured gas footprint here is laid out in this red
Mm-hmm.
Rectangle
Right.
hologram. That was the original footprint of that MGP.
Okay. So the NAPL that is being treated, is that basically like petroleum, or are we dealing with coal tar at all in terms of what is being remediated on site?
Right. Yeah. Sure. There's a kind of a mix of things going on here. There is IPAHs in the form of not saturated NAPL, but existing NAPL that is well above our standard. So, as you can see here in this picture of the proposed remedial excavations, a lot of the darker hatched areas for those proposed areas are surrounding that or within that manufactured gas plant, which will address any residual NAPL, not NAPL, but high PAHs. It's not NAPL. It's just soil contamination, and that's what we're cleaning up here.
Okay. So there's, unlike say, North and Kent Avenue, 50 Kent, where
Different,
a
yeah.
whole different animal.
That's a lot worse than this.
Right.
Yeah, this is just soil contamination in the form of high SVOCs, and specifically within that PAH is associated with that MGP plant.
Okay. Got a B-text type of categorization of.
Some of that would exist here as well. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the lighter end of the
Okay.
of the MGP coal tars.
Okay.
There's also, in and of itself, petroleum on site, which was kind of associated with the BTEX is associated with the petroleum specifically,
Right.
not necessarily the coal tars.
Okay. All right. So just in a very tight nutshell, essentially it'd be dewatering and excavating an extensive amount of soil. Well, at least in one area, it's less extensive, just 2 feet, but in one section that's hot, you're going down 10 feet. But in this former MGP area, that's more extensive in terms of dewatering and excavation and then fill. Did I understand it correctly?
the most most of the excavation will be construction excavation
Okay,
associated with the building foundations, but you know, outside of those building foundations, these darker hatched areas, and you can there's like a footnote or a caption for each of these that kind of tell you the depths that we'll be attaining for each of those remedial excavations, which do exceed or fall outside of those construction excavations. So like the middle of the property is like 23 feet deep. Up near the Wallabout Channel to the right side in the manufactured gas area is 9 feet, and then there's a string of along the northern border on the left side, you know, 15-foot remedial excavations.
okay,
So they would be, you know, dewatering will cover those depths as well.
okay. Then regarding the sheet pile wall along the channel, you know, trying to prevent recontamination. So does that mean that the channel is a continual source of contamination, or the groundwater, or a combination thereof, or
So the sheet pile wall is meant to hold back. It's not necessarily going to hold back contaminated groundwater, as it's not proposed to do so. They are proposing to take out all of the source material on site to eliminate the groundwater contamination. And then because they're doing that, we're now having groundwater monitoring to, you know, to demonstrate that that's the remedy is going to perform the way they want it to.
right. But I thought I read in, you know, the fact sheet that barriers are going to be installed to basically be as a, you know,
Oh,
measure to hold back, you know, potential
okay.
off-site contamination.
All right, I apologize for misunderstanding that. The over here to the north side on the right side of this figure here, there's a caption that reads "waterproof wall to 15 feet to prevent DNAP or NAPL recontamination." So that waterproof wall is to hold back any potential NAPL that has migrated off the site to the right,
I see.
to prevent that from coming back onto site. So that area of the old MGP has not been fully investigated. And that is currently being, you know, we're working with the remedial party, National Grid, to go out and investigate that area further to delineate that off-site area.
Okay. So to, you know, I guess as a preventative measure, as part of constructing the building, typically there's a depressurization type of system set up where if there are residual vapors, they are mitigated with a barrier and a depressurization system. Is that what's being proposed here, or is it?
A subslab depressurization system is not being proposed for these buildings.
Okay.
They are proposing the use of these waterproof membranes to create a barrier surrounding and beneath the building. And realistically, the foundations or the are below the groundwater table. So there technically wouldn't be any vapors down there. It's because it's in water.
I see. Okay. All right. I'm just going to shift over to one other, just about terms with excavation. Is there an estimation of how many truckloads there will be on a daily basis and the duration of that activity?
So so as I mentioned, there are 2 IRMs in progress,
Okay.
which include the phase 1 excavation. This let me see. I don't know if you can still see it. The faint green area is currently being excavated,
Okay.
and it's substantially complete at this point. Trucking is ongoing. Um, I know some days they get just from me being on site and kind of interviewing. It's kind of inconsistent on how many trucks they have in a day,
Mhm.
but they have upwards of around uh, 30 trucks in a given day could be in and out of there.
I see. 30 in a
Um,
given day and they're approximate. So essentially they're focusing on the former NGP area and I guess.
no, right now they're off the MGP area. They're in this
The green area, but
the green area.
but
Yeah.
the work plan will shift into the former MGP area. Is that?
At some point, yes.
Yeah, okay.
This remedial action work plan, once it's in place, then they would move into the MGP area.
Okay.
That time frame is unknown, though. They're kind of working from left to right across the site at this point,
Right.
and I couldn't tell you the development schedule at all.
Okay. Well, I guess it's just on Kent Avenue, which is, I guess, a permissible truck route. And hopefully they're staying on the permitted truck routes to get to the dump destination.
Yes.
Okay.
I can just add to that. They have, maintained their truck washes fairly well. I've seen it myself. They are constantly changing out the truck pad wash down areas and are doing a pretty good job or a good job of washing those trucks down so that there's nothing tracked off site.
That's good to hear. Thanks for adding that. Okay. All right. Well, that's it for me. Committee members, do you have any questions or comments for the DEC team?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead, Laura.
How much petroleum tainted soil will be treated with the oxygen compound?
Well, uh, the goal is to remove all of the petroleum contaminated material, and whatever may be left that they might have missed would be. This is kind of like a polishing approach to making sure they get the rest of it. So if they do leave any behind, that oxygen release compound will continue to work and degrade that any residuals that might be left over after the excavation is completed.
And will any other odor control measures be in place?
There are currently odor control measures in place. During all of the IRM work and excavation work, they've maintained dust and odor suppression in a form of, basically, sorry, sprinklers and just hoses to keep any dust from leaving the site. And surrounding the site, we have what we call camp monitoring or air monitoring, that monitors any odors that may be leaving the site. And everyone's notified if those things exceed their threshold levels for actions. And, they react to it in a couple of different ways. They stop work, or they change how they are performing their work activities to reduce or eliminate those odors and or dust nuisances that might be leaving the site.
Okay. And my last question is, where will the treated wastewater be brought or released?
So the treated wastewater will be it will be treated on site so that it meets New York City's standard for introducing it into their sanitary system.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
So so essentially where will that be released? Like in,
There's a manhole somewhere on, I think it's Division or something, where they're gonna introduce that treated water.
okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. Jerry, would you mind taking down the presentation so we can all see
I'm
each
sorry.
other? That's okay, no
Absolutely.
problem.
Let me get rid of this.
No worries.
Stop sharing.
Thank you. I'm sorry, who asked the question?
It's Trina, and
Oh,
my
hi, Trina.
question, just in layman's terms, because I don't have a sophisticated understanding. You said that the pits that you're digging go below the groundwater, and so basically you're digging, are you digging to a depth that gets you to where you want to be, and so you'll have a pool full of water that will be treated and then put back through the sewage system? I know that's very unsophisticated, but I'm
No,
trying
that's
to-
okay. No. So the groundwater, let's put it, it's a dewatering system. So before they dig into it, they've got to lower that groundwater to below where where they want to excavate to, their depths. And that treated groundwater will then be put through a treatment system and then released back into the sewer. So they won't be like in it. The groundwater will be suppressed before any excavation or activities will be,
So
introduced
you,
to
in the
that site.
area that you're working on, you block the groundwater from entering, and then you dig.
Yeah, in a sense, yes.
Okay, and then I have a question. What is actually to the right of the site where you said you're creating the barriers so that that the potentially contamination
Sure.
doesn't migrate into, I
Yeah.
guess, into the site? What is
So
actually
that's actually a public walkway on the north side of the site to the right. That walkway, I guess, provides access to a ferry stop. I think it's called the Williamsburg South. Am I wrong?
right? So
on
it's
that?
it's the promenade in front of the development that's there. So there are
That's
actually
correct.
buildings right there.
Correct. They would investigate
landing.
that area. Yeah.
But wouldn't, that actually exists there, isn't that already I mean, don't they already, if there's a development there, don't they already know what's there? I don't understand what is uninvestigated to the right of the site.
Right.
Well, to the right, I
Well-
thought was the National Grid spot.
It's not. It hasn't been investigated yet. So by National Grid, it was part of a previous development that was not part of a remedial program. So the city would have manage that site in and of itself. That was not managed previously by DEC.
Then my last question
No.
has to do with the easement. What does the easement mean that eventually when a building is there, that there's restricted use there because of,
That's right.
and so restricted use, will it not be residential or I mean, does it restrict?
Well, what it restricts is the use of the property itself, in the sense that, you know, it's going to say you can't grow vegetables or eat, you know, anything that's grown on the property. It's going to say you can't use the groundwater on the property. It's kind of, nobody drinks the water down there, you know, right there anyway, but you know, it just kind of formalizes those restrictions to kind of, it's our mechanism so that those things will never go away for that piece of real estate. It's just a formalized way for us to do that.
Okay. That's all.
All right.
Sure.
Thanks, Gina. Yeah, that actually triggered another question for me that I remember from the fact sheet is, I guess, the public access area that is not going to be covered by a building in terms of how that will be capped and be safe for people who congregate in that area.
Yeah. So in those areas outside of the construction or, you know, all of the soil that's been removed will be removed down to a depth, you know, that all the soil that's going to exceed the this cleanup objectives will be removed. Then, you know, put back in with new fill material. So that new fill material, anything brought back in will have to also meet the, you know, the cleanup objectives as well. So anything new is cleaned and then covered for those public access areas with, I'm not sure what's proposed for. It could be concrete, could be pavers, it could be asphalt. I'm not sure, but it'll have a cover in and of itself that will also eliminate that pathway for exposure.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. So any other committee or board members have a question or comment? All right. And I'll open it up to the general public. Anyone, any attendees have a question or comment? I guess best way is if you could raise your hand through WebEx. Not seeing any. Oh, Catherine Thompson.
Hi, yeah, I had a question about the bulkhead. You were sort of speaking several times about the barrier that they, you know, put in, the metal barrier to keep the material from going into, I guess, the Walbet channel there. But I'm wondering, and then you said that if they were going to have to monitor it a lot and make sure that it was working. What happens if it isn't working? Do they have to rebuild it? Or is there a way that they could be more confident that they had taken out whatever pollutants that they're concerned about the first time?
Okay, sure. So the bulkhead, it was is being put into place to hold everything in, basically everything that's new that's being put in will be held in place by that bulkhead. The existing one was failing, and you know, so it's kind of an engineering thing. It's not really a remedial thing. But to your point about making sure that the groundwater is clean, that's reaching that bulkhead, we feel that, you know, that the proposed, you know, we're looking at the proposed remedy of excavation of, you know, including the construction and the remedial excavation areas, plus then confirming all of that material that's under those target, you know, the excavation depths also meets the standards, our cleanup objectives. We have a pretty good feeling about them having removed everything that would have, you know, been, you know, that could be contaminated and reaching that bulkhead in the groundwater. So again, between the excavation and confirming everything with those samples, we think that the system will, the remedies will perform as expected, and then, you know, the groundwater would be monitored to prove that. If it doesn't, you know, then they've got to do something else to address the groundwater.
So theoretically, the groundwater will not be permeating the site, right? Post remediation and construction of the new bulkhead.
Groundwater will still move through the site.
Okay,
We hope it's not contaminated.
I see. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you, Catherine, for that. All right. So I think that's it for our discussion. Gerald, I think then we'll just have a quick discussion with the committee here. Again, grateful that you were came to the committee and presented about it. Seems like, you know, a little bit more intense project than some of the ones that we get through here, but yeah, we're counting on you guys. So
Thank you.
yeah, so yeah, committee members to I mean, I feel like I've documented, you know, the questions and the concerns that have been brought up by everyone. So do we want to formulate do we need to feel like submit a comment that we want the board to approve, or do you feel like just making public what was presented here and discussed tonight?
What, Steve, do you think the comment would say?
Well, I think it was just you're noting what the site was. Before it was a lumber yard, it was part of a manufactured gas plant. So there's significant contamination, but it's definitely not at the level of, say, a 50 Kent. And just noting the extent of the you know, of the work plan, and there's been two remedial measures that have been in progress since then, where they're removing, sounds like a ton of soil and bringing in new fill where they're not, you know, where the not building, I guess, the foundation of the new building. And they're building a new bulkhead, and they're, you know, creating barriers where there's a concern about recontamination. So, yeah, it's restricted use for residential, the waterfront public access area. Essentially, it'll be on top of new fill, clean fill. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of, you know, site control, in terms of dust and odors, sounds like that's in place. They're washing the trucks on site, and they're, you know, they're watching that. So that's what I would, you know, I would note in the report. Laura?
Yes, and I'm sorry, in all of these brownfield and Superfund remediations, whatever it is, I think it should always be noted about the past environmental health issues in the community. you know, to always have that exclamation point at the end of we want them to do their very best in keeping the contaminants away from people.
Well, maybe that warrants a comment submission, noting you know, everything that is being done, noting the remedy that's being proposed and the measures that are in progress. Impress upon the agency, we should impress upon the developers, you know, the really incredible history in our neighborhood, environmental issues and health issues in the neighborhood. So I would like to make a motion to submit a comment expressing those concerns.
I'll second, Steve.
Okay. Just a quick roll call vote. Steve Chesler, yes. Eric Brisadis,
Yes.
Corey Canton, Katie, Jenny Horowitz.
Simon.
What was that? I think it
Simon
was only
Weiser.
Katie. Oh, Simon, yeah, no, I was, good to see you, Simon, but yeah, we're taking a vote right now.
Yeah, I can also vote here.
Oh, so you're participating as a ex officio, is that the term?
Yep.
Okay, what is your,
Yeah, I also
What's your
agree
vote?
with the motion, yes.
yes, okay,
Yes.
okay. Yolo, Trina McKeever,
Yes.
Janice Peterson, Bella Sable, William Vega,
Yes.
Laura Hoffman,
Yes,
Kevin Costa, Kay Stewart. Motion passes unanimously.
Steve, Bella is here, but I
Oh,
don't
she
know.
is?
Yeah, I mean,
Bella?
I see her name.
Bella, yeah, what is your vote on the motion? Okay, well. Are you able to hear us? I don't know if you want to call the office, but for now, we have, anyone against? No one against, no abstentions, motion passes. So that's great. So we'll move on. Thank you, Bryce Weissmiller from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for your patience. We went a little bit longer than anticipated on this first item. But yeah, everyone, we're on item number 2. We have a presentation related to the storm risk management draft proposal for essentially the harbor area in New York and New Jersey. And then hopefully we'll focus on what's proposed for Newtown Creek and the Greenpoint shoreline along the East River. So I'll turn it over to you, Bryce, and colleagues that are here with you. Please let us know.
Yep. Just so I kind of time the presentation, how much time do I have for this? Ideally.
15 minutes if possible, but if you need more time, we can, you know, we're still doing well on in time right now. So, yeah.
I will work through it quickly. We have about a 33 slide deck. I'll start sharing it now. Hopefully you can see it all right.
Yep, looking good.
All right, very good.
Oh,
okay.
Excuse me, Bryce, just before we could you please send a copy of your presentation to me so we can include it in our committee report?
Sure. It's a pretty large file, so I'll have to send you a DoD safe file transmission email. So look to do that tomorrow.
That's great. Thank you.
Mr. Chesler, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Bella called the office and she said yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Should I proceed?
Yes, please.
Okay, so just a brief review of the agenda that I'll be covering tonight, the study background, the alternative plans we evaluated on the study, the tentatively selected plan, and then the schedule next steps that we have. So the study is being done in full partnership with New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, the sponsors on the study, but it's also being done in full partnership with New York State Department of State as well as New York City. We have representatives from New York City Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice on the call tonight, as well as from New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And we greatly appreciate their support and partnership in the study. The study area covers all of New York Harbor and all the tidally affected rivers, so it goes all the way up to Troy Lock and Dam on the Hudson River, shown here on the graphic on the left. It's been going on since 2016, July. We were stopped for a couple of years for lack of federal funding, but we got resumed earlier this year and released our draft report in September. It's out under public review right now. The current closing date for the public review is January 6th. But we're looking that might get extended by potentially a couple months. Hopefully we'll learn that soon and we'll announce that, as well as the draft report, and all the appendices are available on this website link. You'll see that later. But if anybody ever wants to learn more about the study of the alternatives, I'd strongly urge you to check out that website. The study area, obviously covering the most densely populated area in the country. It has a lot of notable features shown here on the left. On the right is a graphic that kind of shows the area that would be inundated with water from storm surge from what we refer to as the 1% flood event, otherwise known as the 100-year storm event, with intermediate sea level rise projection added to that. So that's kind of our basis for a comparison between the various alternatives as we stand now. And a lot of these areas have been addressed with some form of coastal storm risk management projects being put in place or having been put in place by the Corps or other agencies. So we're trying to, with this study, serve as a safety net for all areas that have unaddressed coastal storm risk, to try to figure out what the best overall solution might be for it. So the alternatives that we have are very vast and varied. So the alternatives that we have, the first one being no action, is just a projection of what we anticipate happening in the future with sea level rise, and with those other projects being put in place. For a comparison point for the other with project alternatives, alternative 2 through 5, which basically span a spectrum from large in-water measures at one end to only land-based measures at the other. So it kind of steps in from the ocean into the estuary, looking at various combinations of storm surge barriers as well as shoreline-based measures at a variety of locations throughout the harbor area. The plan that we see coming out from the study, regardless of what's advanced after this public review, is likely to have short-term implementation of the less complex actionable features, midterm implementation of those features that are more complex and need more time to design and evaluate, and then long-term adaptation for all the features, so that if sea level rise changes differently from what we had designed or anticipated, that we can adapt the things that are in place to accommodate the change in sea level rise. So again, the future without project condition is our alternative one and our baseline for comparison, and it's using this 1% storm event as our design event for common comparison now. And for that reason, we don't have a lot of natural and nature-based features, because that's a fairly severe storm event. It's similar to what you saw with Hurricane Sandy for much of the study area. So it basically involves a lot of structural solutions and a few non-structural. But it's a very layered system that we have in our tentatively selected plan. But you can see the alternatives as I go through them here are pretty vast. The other projects that have been done, there are hundreds, literally, of specific actions that done at specific critical infrastructure switch complexes various transit hubs and locations. But these are the more longer stretch projects that cover stretches of shoreline that have been done by the Corps, as well as New York City and New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection for those areas over there. So these are all assumed to be in place, and we're also coordinating with other plans. They may not be explicitly incorporated in this future without project condition, but there are a number of other plans that are underway in different locations by other agencies that we're looking to kind of dovetail our plans too. So one of the goals of the study is not to interfere or impede any other actions that anybody has to try to improve coastal storm risk management in the study area, but more or less serve as a safety net for areas that just have unaddressed risk going forward. So the sea level rise is the other main factor that we have in our without project condition. So right now we're using the intermediate core projection, which is the dark gray line. The black line is the low projection, and the white line is the high projection of the core. You can kind of see the timeline that we have for our study is shown here in these gray boxes in the middle. So the study is scheduled to be completed around 2024, and then there's the next steps would be authorization and design and construction. We anticipate requiring, particularly for the alternative that we've tentatively selected, about 14 years in total. Now, some things might be advanced quicker than that, but overall 14 years. And then we have a 50-year period of analysis for the economics. But we anticipate whatever's put in place will be operated and maintained and then adapted over time, pretty much permanently throughout the longer-term planning horizon and into well into the next century. So,
excuse me, Bryce.
Sorry.
Yeah, what is the measurement? What are the units on the right of the graph?
These are in feet.
Those are feet. Okay.
Yeah, 2 feet, 4 feet, 6 feet. You can see by around the turn of the century, we're in the realm of around 6 feet sea level rise under the high projection. It's hard to see, but the little magenta squiggles on the far bottom left are actual measured sea level. This is all at the battery, also just to mention. And then the colored dots are the projections that the two states and the city have over this time period. And you can see their projections are similar, maybe a little bit more concerning, particularly in the out years in the high projection realm. But they also assign probabilities associated with their projections. So we're trying to evaluate for all the different sea level rises, but right now we're using the intermediate for the primary comparison point between the different alternatives. So as I mentioned earlier, the alternatives that we have are basically span from large in-water storm surge gates down to smaller storm surge gates covering smaller embayments, down to smaller storm surge gates. You'll notice there's in a couple of the alternatives, alternative 3B and 4, we have storm surge gate and shoreline-based measures for the Newtown Creek and Greenpoint area of Brooklyn. And then steps further back into the estuary. Alternative 5, which isn't shown here, is defined as only shoreline-based measures. So when you have storm surge barriers, there's basically considerations that you have to give for, what type of risk reduction features might you need behind those barriers when the barriers aren't shut, or for water that might be sloshing around in a larger bay like Jamaica Bay here during a storm event. These are for the very low-lying, high-risk areas. And then outside storm surge gates, is it causing worse flooding anywhere? And so for that, we've introduced into the various plans induced flooding mitigation features for those areas where, based on our modeling, it looks like they could have more severe flooding because of the storm surge barriers put in place. And we don't know which barriers are causing what induced flooding yet. That is something that we need to evaluate further later in the study. So just to cover the alternatives kind of graphically here a little bit, you can see alternative 2, and I won't go into great detail. Basically, alternative 2 and 3A both cover the Newtown Creek and Greenpoint area through storm surge barriers that are pretty far afield from that location. In this case, storm surge barrier along Sandy Hook to Breezy Point and in the Throgs Neck between the Bronx and Queens. Alternative 3A steps further back in the estuary, so it has the same coastal storm risk management for the Greenpoint area, with the storm surge gate on the Arthur Kill, the Verrazano Narrows, and the Throgs Neck again. Alternative 3B, the alternative that we tentatively selected, has steps further back in the estuary, and you'll see this is for Newtown Creek, identical to what we have in alternative 4, which is a shoreline-based measure with a storm surge gate at the mouth of the Newtown Creek, which I'll show in a little bit greater detail here in a few slides. You can see this alternative, and I'll just spend a little time on it since it is the tentatively selected plan. Has a first cost of about $52 billion, with the total cost, including operation and maintenance and a few other factors, of about $76 billion. And as I mentioned, has a construction duration estimate of 14 years. You can see as we go through these alternatives, the mileage of storm surge barriers drops, as well as the price. Storm surge barriers are enormously expensive structures to build, particularly in the more open ocean water areas. And then the amount of shoreline-based measures goes up quite a bit. The induced flooding mitigation features changes quite a bit depending on which alternative. This alternative actually has some of the least amount of induced flooding issues, but it does have a few measures that are put in place around South Bronx, the Harlem River, and on the East River area, kind of opposite of Newtown Creek there on the Manhattan side. And then there's risk reduction features, which I'll show a little bit just briefly, basically outside the Newtown Creek area. Alternative 4 steps further back in the estuary. It's mainly a little different on Staten Island and the New Jersey side, but the New York City side is all identical to alternative 3A, or 3B, sorry. And on alternative 5, being restricted to only on-land measures, it has very limited areas where we have those type of measures that are possible. So that leaves the Newtown Creek area exposed to coastal storm risk. So we've gone through, with the draft report that we released now, a couple rounds of screening of alternatives. We had an interim report that we released back in February 2019, which had preliminary information on all these same alternatives. And at that time, 3A, 3B, and 4 were, and still are, the best performing alternatives. 3B a little bit better now than 3A and 4, primarily from the induced flooding mitigation features, but other considerations as well. So after the draft report and review is over and we've received comments, the decision and the key decision as to whether to stick with the tentatively selected plan alternative 3B and then kind of hone in on it a little bit more, or to go with some other alternative plan. Assuming that we go forward with it, then the key steps would be the optimization and kind of developing that recommended plan in far greater detail. So what we have now in these various plans can be considered somewhat of a framework. There's a lot of details left to be worked out. We have a Tier 1 EIS, which is the longest EIS process that's allowed under NEPA. So this basically is using existing information to do a very preliminary evaluation of the different type of measures and the different alternatives for both construction and operation and maintenance to come up with an impact rating for the different alternatives. Tier 2 evaluation would be done after the study during the design phase if we're authorized for construction by Congress for whatever the recommended action is. There's also a lot of information, I'll just point out, on a story map website where you can actually, it's an interactive website that you can kind of zoom in and see a lot more details, and has a lot of other information on the study besides just the reports which are on our website. So that's another useful tool for the public to look at if they would like. Project cost, basically summarizing what was shown on the prior slides. Alternative 2 has a huge construction period as well as cost, and then it steps down from there quite a bit going as you get into higher number of alternatives. Alternative 3B being the tentatively selected plan, you can see there kind of in the middle at the 52 billion and 76 billion as discussed earlier.
What is, excuse me, I could go back, ask you one question about one of the columns in the previous slide. What is the OM, RR, NR, and IDC?
Operation and maintenance, rehabilitation, repair, and something else that's R. And IDC is interest during construction, which is basically a discounting for the cost over time for building something and not seeing any return on the investment. That is to say, you don't get any benefits until you've completely built the project. So if a project takes a long time to build, that counts against it with the way we do interest during construction. So these two columns here are basically the first cost without contingency, then the contingency. This is what we have to spend to construct it. And then this O&M column is the cost basically for maintaining it over that 50 years. It's worthwhile to note that the construction on these projects is typically in the current core policy, 65% federal, 35% non-federal, and then the operation and maintenance is typically 100% non-federal. So on an average annual basis, alternative 3B, you can see the cost of the 76 billion spread out over the 50 years comes to about 2.6 billion, but the benefits given its coverage is about 6.3. So subtracting this 2.6 from the 6.3, you get the 3.7 net benefits, which is really our primary driver to the selection process. Basically the alternative that gives you the biggest bang for the buck. It also has a benefit cost ratio, which a lot of times people use to judge these kind of things, at about 2.5. So it's a fairly well justified project or alternative. Again, the details of it basically involves 8 main features throughout the harbor area. One is the Newtown Creek storm surge gate and shoreline-based tie-ins, but there are other shoreline-based measures, which I'll go through very quickly, just so you're kind of aware of them. But there's large surge gates on the Arthur Kill and KVK, South Brooklyn and Jamaica Bay, and South Queens, Flushing Creek and Newtown Creek, kind of similar approaches there is what we have with Newtown Creek, and then some shoreline-based measures in Jersey City, Manhattan, and East Harlem. So again, Killing Cole and Arthur Kill storm surge gates. We have renderings of what those would look like. There's details on what the scale of those surge gate structures are. Some of those risk reduction features I mentioned in Jersey and along Staten Island. Some non-structural measures also in Staten Island and New Jersey area related to that feature. The feature in Jamaica Bay, risk reduction features behind it, and some induced flooding mitigation features around Breezy Point. Number of storm surge gates in the Jamaica Bay area. Shoreline-based measures along downtown Manhattan, going up to about 34th Street in Lower Manhattan. Jersey City, another very long shoreline-based measure that kind of dovetails with what New Jersey DEP is doing in Hoboken. Gowanus Creek, shoreline-based measures around Red Hook, storm surge gate, sector gate there at the mouth of Gowanus Creek, and then tie off to high ground. Flushing Creek, similar shoreline-based measures with the storm surge gate. And then getting to, I know your primary focus, Newtown Creek. Again, this feature is common in alternative 3B and 4. And it involves basically about, roughly 3 miles of shoreline-based measures leading to what we currently have conceptually designed as a 130-foot wide sector gate structure at the mouth of the Newtown Creek, and then tying off on Long Island City. You can see there at northern terminus and down here in the Greenpoint area. Basically avoiding coastal storm risk then for the area shading green for that 1% storm event that we're currently using for our evaluation comparison for design and benefit analysis. Now, as we do optimization, we might optimize it and identify that it generates greater net benefits by designing it for a 300-year event instead of the 100-year event, or potentially something less. I doubt that, given how urbanized the area is, but the elevation of these structures might change because of that optimization process. Couple main considerations, of course, with the conceptual layout that we have for this area is that there is a very large wastewater treatment plant there that New York City DEP has, that we probably have to divert the discharge of that outside the storm surge gate so that release of material from that plant doesn't cause backwater flooding in the area during a storm event when the gates are closed. And then, of course, there's contamination issues there with the sediments in Newtown Creek. And we've had coordination discussions with EPA Region 2 about that. And that is something that, for any core civil works project would have to be sufficiently remediated and cleaned up by non-federal interest prior to our being able to build this project. So those are two big issues that we'd have to work through on this alternative or this feature going forward. Just to show it in a little bit more resolution and detail, you can see the areas in purple areas where we have seawall, storm surge gate there, sector gate, as I mentioned, 130 feet wide. And then the green areas are levee areas and the yellow are flood walls. These are very preliminary, just looking based on available information and engineering judgment is what we think might be possible in those areas, but something obviously that would have to need to be coordinated much more thoroughly with both the communities on the Queens as well as the Brooklyn side, is if and as this feature is advanced, both in the study as well as ultimately then the design phase, and even during the construction of it. This is roughly, this feature is around the $1.5 billion range. So it's a pretty substantial construction project in and of itself. So the draft report is on the website, as I mentioned earlier, with that link. The two places to start are the story map, that interactive GIS website I was telling you about, as well as the reader's guide, which kind of gives a description of what the different chapters of the report, which is 500 plus pages, as well as all the appendices, of which there's a couple dozen, evaluate and discuss. So all told, there are literally thousands of pages of information there on the study, given the vastness of it and the complexity of the features and alternatives that are under consideration. The timeline that we have is basically right now, and again, it might change this week, as the closing comment period is January 6th, and we're looking to have in-person meetings in December and probably into January if we get that extension. And we're looking to have the first one, I believe, on the 15th in downtown Manhattan, but we're looking to have a number of them throughout the study area. The locations to be determined, and they will be announced as we identify them on our website. So the study is currently scheduled to be completed by June of 2024, but that might get extended a little bit given the delays in the extension in the public review period and some of the prior delays that we had in funding resumption. That were kind of assumed within that 2024 time period. So in summary, our tentative selected plan is alternative 3B, and we have an extended public review, and we would welcome any comments that the community board one would like to offer, or any of the constituents there on the alternative. Just bear in mind that it is a framework. It's very conceptual still, so we may not be able to answer a lot of the more detailed questions that people might have, but right now our key decision that we have to kind of make after we get through the public review is whether to stick with alternative 3B or whether alternative 3A or alternative 4. Those two alternatives are also perform fairly well. Whether those would be preferable by any of the various constituents as well as non-federal sponsors, so that we can then kind of do a deeper dive on those alternatives, get a lot more details, and move towards getting the final report and then that chief of engineers report, which concludes the study. So that's it in a nutshell. I'd love to answer any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you so much, Bryce. Really appreciate it. Yeah, it's kind of daunting, amazing and daunting at the same time.
For me too, believe me.
Yeah. I was wondering if you had a sketch, a rendering of what a storm surge barrier might look like.
Sorry, I'm trying to get back there.
Yeah, and or not and or, but also a seawall or a levee, similar to what would be proposed for the tie-ins.
Yes, there are in the engineering appendix drawings to kind of give a feel for, as well as some pictures of representative examples of what they look like. And on the interactive website, I'm not showing it here, but we actually have, for example, the flood walls, different size flood walls, extra large, large, Right now, the cost estimates that we have are very, first cut. And it's really the key evaluation has been largely economically driven so far.
Mhm.
But there are representative examples of that, and we also are looking to have renderings, and I believe one of them is for this area along Huron Street in Greenpoint to kind of show what the seawall there might look like. Again, the location for those features are very preliminary. It might change. The elevation of them might change. And then, of course, the type of feature, whether it'd be better to have an elevated promenade in one area versus a flood wall or a levee system in other areas. Right now, our key consideration, if we go forward with an alternative that has this same feature, is basically making sure that our cost estimate, which is really the key thing, and our recommendation to Congress, it's like, okay, we think you should do this, and we estimate it to cost this amount. What Congress does at that point, if they're so inclined, as well as the administration, is give us authorization to do that construction work. And that basically is authorization to construct this project as generally described by the Corps for this X amount of dollars. And so having that dollar estimate for this feature as well as those 7 other features be as accurate as possible is really the key thing that we're trying to nail down now. Not so much that it's a flood wall in this exact location or a levee in this exact location, but that the cost estimate that we have for doing this type of a 3-mile long shoreline-based measure with storm surge gate at the mouth of Newtown Creek is roughly in the $1.5 billion range, is what I mentioned earlier.
So
And
yeah,
a
so
hefty
the,
contingency right now.
yeah, sorry,
Sorry.
okay, no, what's essentially being envisioned for the, the wall, the gate or the barrier in Newtown Creek, is this something that would essentially sit on the, on the bed of the creek and then extend above the water? And then approximately how tall would that, above the water, the sea level would be?
Sure. That detail is on the prior slide. It's basically a 130-foot wide sector gate, which are basically 2 curved steel gate structures that kind of think of it as a double gate, like you might see on a fence, where they both swing. They're stationed in little housing units on both sides of the channel, and they both swing out and meet in the middle during a storm event to close it off from storm surge. There's actually a sector gate storm surge barrier that was built in, I believe it's New Bedford, Massachusetts, by the Corps back in the 1960s. So they're fairly common storm surge gate structures, particularly for creeks that are not terribly deep and fairly close from shore to shore. There are, in some of the larger storm surge gates, like at the mouth of the Kilvan Cole, it's a much different, it's referred to as a swing sector gate. It sounds similar, but it's a very different type structure in terms of its operation. A sector gate like what you might see here on Newtown Creek, those can be opened and closed within, in the realm of an hour, fairly quick, whereas the floating sector gates, like you might see on the larger waterways, can take several hours to actually activate and close. So
Okay, but in its open state, so there's 2 sections of this barrier essentially would be parallel to, I don't know how far out into the mouth of the creek would be, but essentially they would be parallel to the shorelines that, and then extend 17 feet in here.
You can kind of see it, the layout here that we have for it now. Let me go to that next slide. You can see it's a little, it's kind of more perpendicular to the line of the creek as it approaches into the East River. So it's a little bit more angled more towards northeast and or northwest and southeast in its axis. More or less perpendicular to the line of the channel, a little stepped in from the East River.
Okay. And then with the tie-ins along the East River shoreline going down to Transmitter Park, yeah, so those potentially how tall would those be above the water? And then how far from the shoreline would they be potentially?
Well, the seawalls are typically on the water's edge. So then the flood wall and levees might be stepped back a little bit.
Mhm.
These are very preliminary first cut ideas is what we think from an engineering perspective and based on what existing information that we have available to us might be done in these various areas. So to get back to your question, the elevation, it's a 17-foot crest elevation currently for the storm surge gate. And it's typically a little bit higher for the shoreline-based measures that it ties into. And that's because there's more stringent overtopping design criteria for the shoreline-based measures, the tie-ins, than there is for the storm surge gate. Storm surge gates, if they're overtopped a little bit more, there's nothing directly there to be flooded, whereas on a shoreline-based measure, there is something that can be flooded and damaged, and typically the on-land areas can be flooded quickly from overtopping. So there's a different elevation, probably on the order of 2 or 3 feet higher than that. So these are not by any means for our current evaluation minor limited structures. These would be very noticeable along the shoreline, very tall structures, potentially in the realm of maybe 15 feet, depending on what the existing ground elevations are like.
Okay, so,
And there might be ways of making it more community and public friendly, but you know, to be able to hold out a potentially 15-foot or 20-foot storm surge, it requires a fairly massive structure.
right, okay.
That being said, we only build projects that are supported by non-federal sponsors, which won't support it unless it's supported by the community and elected officials, and if it's supported and authorized and appropriated with funds by Congress. So all we do in our studies is make recommendations. We
Right.
don't dictators.
Right, yeah, well, you know, where the North Brooklyn has experienced some of the most intense population growth in the entire city over the last like 15 years. And
Sure.
so we're basically living on top of one another. So we take the open space that exists and that's in progress.
Oh,
you know,
highly valued. I
yeah,
understand.
so
Absolutely.
yeah, because I mean, recently I saw videos of the completed, I guess it's considered a seawall along in Manhattan, in lower Manhattan, and basically on the
Mhm.
bike lane, you're going down the bike lanes, right, I don't know if it's right next to the FDR, you see a wall, you cannot see the river or the shoreline, et cetera.
Sure.
So, yeah, I guess so I guess it's, we're combined is considering values, trying to lessen destruction from predicted increasingly destructive storms. And as you address the treatment plant and the Superfund site in Newtown Creek, as folks may or may not know, that the City of New York has not been in compliance with the Federal Clean Water Act. So, nor, New York Harbor in general. So there's something called a long-term pollution control plan. And there's a proposal for Newtown Creek to build these massive wastewater diversion tunnels under the Newtown Creek and properties in Queens to reduce some of the largest flow of combined sewage overflow during storms. There are 13 of them, and 4 of the biggest in the city, the highest volume. And just the legacy pollution in the creek. So you've addressed that, well, we have to address discharge from the plant, which is already still a problem. with this plan and modifications to pumps and et cetera, they're only gonna get to 70% reduction of the waste, you know, of sewage during rainstorms and during other times. So it sounds, you know, that this, if move forward with this plan, that we would go backwards in terms of reducing pollution versus, you know, destruction from a storm, you know, in the sense that we're weighing it out. It's like what I'm hearing with electric vehicles and battery construction. It's like a pollution versus greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. This is, you know, I mean, drastically different, but yeah, I mean, there's just so many we've, you know, what Laura was referring to during the last item, just the history of environmental abuse and degradation in this neighborhood for centuries, for decades, in terms of, and then we're moving towards, you know, cleaning up our waterways. We've gotten waste transfer stations out of the neighborhood to a great extent. It's still significant, and so we just, you know, value our open spaces to
Absolutely.
an enormous extent. So yeah, and but one area also, I mean, I'm just kind of, you know, think is the induced flooding. So
Yeah.
I guess we've alluded to is that during, you know, a storm surge event and the barriers are closed, and then with the existence of these tie-in structures, there will be, I don't want to call it collateral flooding, or, you know, please, you know, correct me, but just understand that's, and then, so built into, say, you know, Plan 3B, or if you choose one of the other ones, is methods to reduce the impact of those, if I understand.
Yes. Yes. Not only the impact from the worsened amount of flooding, but the flooding altogether. So those areas would benefit tremendously, not just because, you know, they, for example, you can see the little dotted section there on the opposite side of Manhattan around Kips Bay. That there's an induced flooding feature in this alternative for that area because it's anticipated to have slightly worse flooding. Not necessarily because of the Newtown Creek barrier, that might be contributing to it, but it might be due to the Arthur Kill and the Kilvent Coal or the Jamaica Bay barriers. We don't know. We'd have to do a lot more modeling to find that out. But we have included for any of the areas where our model shows that all of these features that are in this plan that would have worse flooding, we have included features along those shoreline areas to deal not only with that incremental increase of worsened flooding, but for all the flooding that would occur in those areas. So we're trying to make it a somewhat not benefiting one area at the expense of others in doing it. But that being said, like you say, this area has a very long history of legacy pollution. It is making great strides in getting better. And, you know, the trade-offs that we have, there's no perfect solution with any of these alternatives. They all have some type of impact or pros and cons associated with them. So if Greenpoint, you know, would prefer alternative 3A versus this because it would involve this type of activity on the shoreline. But on the Verrazano Narrows, I can tell you, a lot of opponents to that alternative for having a gate structure on the discharge of the Hudson River, Hudson River Keeper, things like that. So we're trying to balance all these various needs, but, you know, when it comes down to it, we think this has the least amount of those induced flooding impacts. It has the greatest bang for the buck in terms of the economics. It does provide some localized protection for some things. So, you know, some people like to have all their eggs in one basket. Some people prefer to have, you know, kind of diversified approaches for different areas. So this is a area where, you know, these are features that would be put in place to protect the people of, you know, Long Island City and Greenpoint and, you know, Brooklyn, Queens. All that green shaded area that would be otherwise potentially impacted over the next 50 years and beyond. from coastal storms, because, you know, Hurricane Sandy, people might think of it as a one-off, and certainly those severe storms do not happen that frequently, thankfully, but they do happen, and there is a historical and a prehistorical record of them happening in this area, and those are only going to get worse as sea level rise exacerbates. So,
Okay. Just to
just
kind
trying
of,
to put out options.
yeah, just we'll try and bring this in induced flooding, trying to understand, I guess, in layman's terms. So, so you're trying to dampen the impact of a storm surge from, you know, like a major, you know, these supposedly, you know, predicted increasingly intense storms that will affect our area. And so there's the, I guess, kind of, you know, the brute force from that storm surge, and then in creating these mitigating structures, dampening structures, they will create, I guess, I don't want to call it like peripheral flooding, like the water's got to go somewhere.
And that's what the induced flooding mitigation features address. Yeah.
Right. So say one focused area, instead of experience maybe 10 feet of flooding, a more broader area might experience 4 or 5 feet of flooding. Is that just kind
Well,
of
so the study area is so vast. It's you know, the 1% flood event for, let's say, Raritan Bay may cause 20 feet of water, whereas in the East River, believe it or not, it has the lowest flood risk profile, and that's primarily because the East River is a discharge from either Western Long Island Sound out into the Atlantic or the reverse, and the storm surge rarely actually does not hit at the same time. There's a phase difference in tide between those two water bodies. So for that reason, a lot of the communities along the East River are actually somewhat benefited. So that same 1% flood event, which may cause 20 feet of water in Raritan Bay, is in this area more in the 12 to 14 feet range.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've done is we've thrown all these features into the model, both with the features and without the features, and compared how those water levels were between those two events. And anywhere where the water levels were worsened because of, again, not just the Newtown Creek feature, but all 8 of the features that are contained within this tentatively selected plan, we have put in those areas where the flood waters have become worse, instead of being 14 feet, maybe it's 15 feet. We've put shoreline-based measures to deal with that 15-foot water elevation. So those areas would have gotten flooded anyway from the 14 feet, having done nothing. And with these features put in place, they would be flooded by the 15 feet of water. And for that reason, so that nobody is harmed by the benefit of others being protected, we've included in not just this tentatively selected plan, but in all the plans, we had an even apple-to-apple comparison, induced flooding features. And on the other alternatives 3A and 4, there's a substantially larger amount of induced flooding mitigation features, which is one of the benefits and one of the reasons why alternative 3B, the tentatively selected plan, kind of stood out from those other two as we evaluated them further when we did the interim report back in 2019.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one last question. Thank you for that. Still trying to get my head around that, but I'll dig into the literature. But looking at this map, and you can see the flooding in Greenpoint and parts of Williamsburg,
sure,
is primarily from Newtown Creek, one of the most, the most polluted waterways in the United States, just laden with sewage bacteria, chemicals, petroleum, et cetera, et cetera. There's still, you're probably aware that the analysis, they're finding it so complex that they extended the feasibility study process for five more years, just to figure, to try and get a handle on that. But just, very crude terms, do you see the green areas reduce, lessening with the, with these the 3B measures implemented?
Well, the 3B would keep the area shown in green. Again, it's currently designed for that 1% flood event, but again, that might get optimized to be something different. But the 1% flood event with the intermediate silver rise projection basically would cause flooding for that whole green shaded area. And by putting those roughly 3 miles of shoreline-based measures with that storm surge gate, that area would be managed for coastal storm risk over the, like I said, at least the next 50 years, if not the next century or more. So that justifies the $1.5 billion. All those damages that we anticipate would occur over that 50-year economic period of analysis from when construction would be ended justifies the investment of that $1.5 billion initial cost that I described,
So,
which is the overall 52.7 billion of this whole.
so if I heard you correctly, there would be no reduction in the flooding in these green areas, and
Oh, there would be.
there would be.
There would be.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the benefit of it. This area, which would be flooded over the next 50 years from coastal storms, would not if we did these measures. And that gets that trade-off, figuring out how to build structures along the water's edge, which is highly valued area in such an urbanized location, like you were describing for the East Side Resiliency Project in Manhattan. How best to do that and still be able to manage these storm events, which, may happen somewhat infrequently, but they do happen and can cause a world of damage.
Yeah.
And that would also help to keep whatever contamination exists within those waterways from being remobilized during a storm event as well.
Right. Yeah.
It's such an industrialized area. There are a lot of environmental benefits from not just, from people getting flooded and the businesses, but, there are a lot of environmental benefits from not flooding those highly industrialized, contaminated areas as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say just based on all the information that we're gathering here, I think an extension of the deadline would be welcome, because I feel like, there has been some media coverage about this plan, but I feel like it's really there's a question of values and philosophy about, what's really important to people right now. And, just, people, there's a large contingency of people who were just devastated by the changes to East River Park, just, leveling about 1,000 mature trees and et cetera, et cetera. And it sounds like, I don't know if that's necessarily would happen to Transmitter Park or Newtown Barge Park, but maybe, but if you're putting, the creation of these very tall structures that would essentially block the view of the water and the skyline, et cetera. And it just seems very oppressive in nature, and it's just with so many pressures from, economic and pandemic and otherwise, where, our open spaces are saviors, just in terms of health and well-being. It's about equity, parks are, a great equalizer, doesn't matter who you are, where you live, where you work, parks are parks. So anyway, I've gone on for a long time. I want to open it up to my colleagues on the committee if they have any questions, comments. Just trying to see if anybody has their hand up.
Steve, could I ask a question, just a clarifying question? It's Trina.
Go for it, Trina.
If I understand right from when we worked on the different promenades in front of the buildings, that the current elevations at about 12 feet at the shoreline, at the various bulkheads in front of some of the developments, is that right? And so this would be an additional 5 feet of wall. And is it envisioned that the wall would be outside the bulkhead, or would it be inside the bulkhead? I mean, I'm trying to understand what the layout would be.
The story map has greater detail in terms of where we currently have these lines outlined along the shoreline. In terms of elevations, you might very well be correct, depending on what specific location you're looking at. If it is at an elevation, and I don't know if you're based off of mean sea level or NAVD 88 or what datum you're working from, but as I mentioned, these are all based off of NAVD 88, which is again somewhat close to mean sea level. So you have a couple feet of between there and high tide, and so if you're 12 feet above high tide, yeah, this might be for that location something much smaller where it might be in that realm of 5 feet or thereabouts.
And
But
would that 5 feet be within, on top of the bulkhead, or would it be outside on the water side of the bulkhead?
Typically, the seawall would be at the bulkhead area along the water line, which covers much of the Greenpoint shoreline area. There is some areas where we do have some flood wall planned. But again, these are very preliminary concepts of what type of shoreline-based measure might be doable in those locations. There are a number of other types. There's an elevated promenade you can see for that stretch in Long Island City that might also work in some of these areas down in the Community Board 1 area. That's something we would actively want to coordinate with the community if this plan goes forward as it is, both in terms of the subsequent stages of the study and more so the design phase that follows after the study, which is when we would get into collecting corings, looking at the exact alignments of the location where it would be, and then what type of measure would be best in those different measures.
And typically, what's the width of a seawall?
Well, it depends on the elevation. So the taller the seawall, the wider the footprint, similar to a levee. And even the flood walls, as they need to be taller, the footings and the size of the flood wall structure itself, the thickness of the walls, all scales up. So it's very variable in that regard. It's hard to speak to it very specifically. And what we have assigned, and you can actually see this on the story map website, is what size of, I mentioned earlier that we have just kind of generic sizes of large, extra large, medium, small flood walls for the various shoreline-based measures. You can actually scroll in on the story map website and kind of see what feature is exactly assigned in these different locations. So we have tried to take into account to some degree the ground elevation that might exist in the area, but this is all based off of just remote sensing data of what the elevation is reported to be. So there's a lot of uncertainty associated with that. And for that reason, of that $52.7 billion cost that we have for this plan, about a third of that is just contingency because of all those unknowns. So hopefully those costs will all drop as we kind of get more details on it. But like I said earlier, this is kind of a framework. We don't have nearly as many answers to the questions that you have, and very understandable and good questions as we would like to. But
developers are obligated to give a certain amount of feet of open space in front of their development, and if there's a thick sea, are developers going to have to build back further if this is being anticipated? I mean, it really eats into, as Steve was saying, not only, I mean, not to mention the view shed, but just the amount of open space that this community so sorely needs.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and that's something I think we'd have to work out the details with New York City. They set those requirements for the developers on those type of things.
I have one other question, which has to do with the Bushwick Inlet and the Newtown Creek area. With the area that you have in green was very flooded, but Bushwick Inlet, which is a little south of here, also in Greenpoint, was suffered bad flooding, and I'm wondering whether that was considered, that area at all.
We have considered quite a few areas, and given the urbanization of the area and the high cost of doing anything in the area, frankly, you need to have pretty broad and vast areas that are impacted from these coastal storms to generate sufficient benefits to justify the cost for doing these kind of either storm surge gate or shoreline based measures systems, which is why there's only 8 features for this. I think I have it up here in the, let me just zoom back real quick. This alternative 3B, has about 50 miles of shoreline based measures, of which 3 are roughly in the Newtown Creek area. The overall study area has 900 plus miles. Now, of course, a lot of that is natural areas along like the Hudson River, but even in the New York City area, you're still dealing with about 500 miles of shoreline. And so we're only able to, at this level of evaluation, to justify doing these level of measures that covers this. So
would the Army Corps of Engineers ever weigh in on proposed development along the Newtown Creek? Because right now there is incredible development proposed for basically at the edge of the, I mean, not the creek, the Bushwick Inlet.
Well, if it involves any kind of activity in the water of the water area, we have a regulatory role in that, in regulating the waters of the United States. I work in the civil works arena, which is completely separate and apart from the regulatory office. But if there is activity by any non-federal interest that would cause any kind of action in the water, then we would have a regulatory role.
Okay, well, that was sort of beside the point, so we can go. I guess that's the end of my questions.
All right, thank you, Trina. William. You're muted, William.
Am I good now? Thank you, Steve. I'm not an engineer or an expert, but when I was working, I was with the city's emergency response unit to help businesses when they're impacted by natural or man-made disasters. And when Hurricane Sandy hit us, I was deployed to Far Rockaways. A lot of damage, generational. But there were some properties that the developers were from Florida, so they built it to survive Hurricane Sandy, and we were all in shock. And those are our recommendations. Then going fast forward, 13 months ago, we had Ida hit us. And I went to the same areas in Far Rockaway, and Ida did damage to these properties. So whatever formulas you have is changed. I was also deployed in commercial corridors in Brooklyn that Department of Environmental Protection and Design and Construction built corridors that heavy storms that would pitch into the catch basins. It's all designed. That all failed. And in addition to that, the floods we have were so significant, and because of the pandemic or the fact that people can't afford space, you had a lot of people living in illegal basements. We had people drown because they couldn't escape. It's just, because of the economics, and also I think is whatever formula you're using has to be much more current. The old formula, I'll tell you a quick story. When the day of 9/11 happened, my office was going to, at that time, it was at the World Trade Center, Office of Emergency Management, planning for Hurricane Sandy. But what hit us was terrorism. So all the money we had saved that was going to be allocated to help us survive, because it was overdue, went to fight terrorism. So this is an issue that I think is accelerating. So whatever past timetables are, that should be thrown out the window, because I think because of climate change, all these things, all these factors, and in our area, overdevelopment, these events of storms, it doesn't have to be at the level of Hurricane Sandy. They're going to come more often, and we don't have the structure here to survive it. That's just my, my 2 cents. Thank you.
Sure. No, thank you for your comment.
Thank you, William. Laura?
Yes, did I understand correctly that any of these measures wouldn't move forward until the Newtown Creek is completely cleaned up?
not necessarily completely cleaned up, but the area in which these measures would need to be put, there at the mouth of Newtown Creek, that area where we would need to put those sector gates and then the sill structure going across the channel would need to be sufficiently cleaned up from hazardous, toxic, radiological type waste. Hopefully you don't have radiological waste, but who knows? Certainly hazardous and toxic contaminated materials would have to be cleaned up by non-federal interests, and the non-federal sponsor would be required, common requirement that we have for all of our civil works projects prior to our being able to implement this feature in that area.
So my understanding that isn't going to happen for another, what, 30 or so years. So this plan is, say, maybe 40 or 50 years out.
I don't know the timeline for that. As I mentioned, that it is a very localized area where this feature would be located. It's not the entire creek, of course, that would need to be cleaned up. It's just the area where the storm surge gate would be located. But if that area, it's if for what reason it's delayed, yeah, that could.
Yeah, that makes me very concerned.
Sure.
Even though, like, I share the same sentiments that Steve has about the open space and so forth, but I'm also very concerned about flooding. So clearly something needs to be done. Just the idea that if nothing would be done because of the contaminated state for so many years, it's beyond me. And it's beyond me that the EPA and you guys are in, like, I don't know, like better better communicating with each other.
Oh, we have been. We had a meeting with the EPA Region 2 about all of these various features just a couple weeks ago. And previously we've been coordinating. It's just, right now this is a conceptual plan. This is our very first, for all the years of study we've been doing, this is the very first point where we said, we think this is the plan that might be the best one for a variety of reasons, economics, environmental considerations, other things, for addressing coastal storm risk for this area. It doesn't have to be done. If the non-federal partner, the city and the state are interested in advancing this, then I'm sure that accommodations could be made for dealing with the remediation of that specific area where the storm surge gate could be done. But it just takes the will and the interest to do it on their part, and of course funding as well. I can only say that our agency makes an assumption that the areas are free of contamination so that we can build what we want to build, because we didn't cause the contamination. So that the cleanup that might be needed, we see as something that is borne upon the non-federal sponsor for that. That's a policy decision by our agency. So that's kind of how we have to approach this.
Yeah, for us, it's, we constantly feel like we're in some kind of environmental vortex, because we get stuck in these situations where we have so much contamination around us. And I'm a part of the Newtown Creek CAG, and also a member of the Newtown Creek Monitoring Committee from the sewage treatment upgrades. So I know, like, about the issues with the contamination at the sewage treatment facility and so forth. I mean, the guys there, they literally saved this community from being overwhelmed with sewage during Sandy, because they actually worked through all that flooding. There was fish on Greenpoint Avenue,
Yeah.
right in the street. So, like, the guys there were like heroes during that time. But it's just like very stunning to to see that like these kind of measures may not go forward for 40 years, 50 years. I mean, move forward. Um, I was part of a planning rising sea levels meeting way back in the 1990s, talking about all the same things. And then again, with Mayor Bloomberg's office, and we seem to like keep talking about it, but actually not coming up with a solution for this environmental vortex and, you know, being able to do something about the rising sea levels. So I hope that things are going to, you know, something is going to move forward.
I sincerely hope so also.
All right, thanks, Laura. Eric?
Thanks, Steve. So just picking up on Laura's question, do you, I know that none of the significant cleanup of the creek has really started, but to what degree of cleanliness does it actually need to be for you to start that work, one? And two, have you met with the Queens CB at all? And have you heard any pushback at all on Plan B?
We have not given a briefing to the Queens Community Board for that area. We have a briefing that's planned for the Queens Borough President, I believe possibly this week, might get rescheduled. But we're hoping through that avenue that we can kind of reach out to not just this community board, but several others there in Queens that also have our features. Our features, as you can have seen, touch upon many community boards. So we have done briefings for a few in Manhattan, have a few more planned, some in Brooklyn and Southern Queens, but not in this area particularly yet. That being said, we have high hopes of doing that. And again, we do have several in-person meetings that we have planned throughout the city and some in New Jersey as well that we're hoping to get scheduled and advertised here in the next few weeks into December and January, with the assumption that we're getting an extension on our public review time period.
And the level of cleanliness that you need to proceed?
Oh, yes. Getting back to your first point. Basically that it's free of hazardous and toxic waste as defined by, you know, there's a fairly long list of different criteria for, you know, what defines a hazardous material. Exceedance on leachate tests. It likely for this area would be removal of all of the Holocene contaminated material down to more of the plasticine or bedrock layers around where the storm surge gate is for the roughly 100 to 200 foot width that we would need for not just the structures and the sill plate going across the channel, but then scour beds on both sides. One thing that that storm surge barriers do is they kind of entrain water flow as they go through them. Just from the constraining point, it doesn't generally affect tide, prism, or range, but there is an increased water flow velocity around the area around the storm surge gate. So you also need to put down bedding stone to protect for scour around the structures. So it would be somewhere in that range of, you know, maybe 200 foot width over the distance across the channel that would have to be remediated. Again, very likely probably removing all the contaminated Holocene sediments in that area. I honestly don't know how deep the contaminated materials. I've taken samples in Newtown Creek decades ago myself, and I just don't know how deep those contaminated materials go.
It's pretty deep, from what I understand.
It seemed it. It seemed it. Yeah.
Especially if you're counting the, you know, the sinkage into the black mayonnaise, which is what,
Yes.
Steve, another 10, 15 feet of something like that.
Yeah.
So I cut out a little bit when you were going through the process. So this has to get congressional approval, and since we're entering a phase of dysfunction again, uh, have you had strategy meetings as to, I don't know, like the likelihood of getting funding in if you are actually going to go before Congress in 23 for this funding? I mean, it might not be till 24, but it's the same scenario, I guess, right? So, what are you looking at in terms of like the reality of getting this funded?
We make a recommendation to Congress, and the administration sometimes endorses, sometimes does not endorse for whatever reasons, that recommendation to Congress. And then the subcommittees that evaluate the Corps of Engineers recommendations generally do so on a very bipartisan basis. It's not as political as you might see quite often, more so with the national politics. But that being said, it does come down to, the political will of the committee, and, this area being so highly urbanized and with so many representatives does have a lot of weight, obviously, in that evaluation process. So, what I think is most tangible in terms of advancing projects after we make our recommendations to get authorization and then appropriations to design them is having strong non-federal sponsor support, and then having a project that, every plan that we have and that I showed tonight has pros and cons, but having something that has kind of not 100%, you'll never have that, but broad support, that, the representatives and the senators can hear from their constituents, in concert with the non-federal sponsors supporting this project, goes a long ways towards getting, that authorization for construction. So it's out of our hands. All we do is make a recommendation, and then it is, elected officials. We live in a democracy, and we're public servants. So, whatever they so decide to authorize and appropriate funds for, we will look to advance.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. This is there's so much to dig into with this, and it's hard just to get questions out in this short period of time to digest it all. But overall, I support it. I hear Steve's concerns about the open space access and things like that. But somebody that used to work for NIPERG on environmental issues, and especially out on Long Island, I've been calling for my compatriots to start moving into infrastructure fixes like this for at least 10 years now, and trying to shift the focus onto what we need to do to just accept this flooding that's going to happen, instead of fighting the old fights, or fighting the old fights, but also, prioritize making new priorities for stuff like this. So I wish you luck. I'll look forward to the public comments, and thank you for your answers.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Eric, for that. Okay, I see one board member, Sante, and then we'll move to everyone else.
Well, I thank you for the presentation. I just have a couple of questions. I didn't look at the system. I know Steve mentioned that he read that article about. So one of my questions is, are those are those fixed system that when you spoke about 17 feet high, or those are flexible system? For example, I know that a system in Venice, I'm Italian originally, the MOS, which hasn't been all the time very successful, has failed, but this for other technical problem. And I had occasion to look other system that in the Netherlands, the Dutch have used. So there are actually operable system that can go up and down. So if the issue of having this structure as permanent structure with an elevation of 17 feet, is there other technology that you are aware, or is other technology may not be immediately available today, but as this is a long it's an issue is projected on an extended period of time of years. I don't know if it's really rushing through this process now immediately when we may have other solution to remediate that. And of course, as a general comment, it's kind of absurd. It's astonishing the way we keep developing in area, because I see all the area of flooding are the area where development are happening right now. I wish, looking at the cost of billions of dollars, I wish it would have been probably much cheaper if we could have intentionally renaturalized this area and making them a natural system, a natural resilient system, probably have been far more effective in terms of cost. Yeah, but my main question was about the structure. Is there about the operability structure? It could go up and down and not being permanently fixed.
Sure. So the sector gate structure that we currently assumed for the closing of the inlet of the Newtown Creek is based off of just an engineering judgment based on the type of closure structures that have been done on similar creeks. I mentioned New Bedford earlier that had a sector gate on it. But that being said, there are other types of gate structures. There's a vertical lift gate. There's one in Stamford, Connecticut, for example, that the Corps built and operates and maintains also, that lifts up out of the channel to close off that waterway leading into Stamford. Sorry. That, you know, we've made an initial assumption with the sector gate, but it's not by far not, you know, set in stone and something we would want to evaluate and consider further going forward. And then with whatever is put in place, we want to make sure that there's the ability to adapt those structures over time in the longer term future, so that if sea level rise, which right now over the last 30 years has been trending most closely to the Corps' intermediate projection, but if it starts breaking more towards the high projection, given that that is so much different, we want to make sure that these things are adaptable, so that, you know, we can make changes, alterations to them in time without having to tear them out altogether and putting in something new to raise the elevation on these structures so that they can adjust to those changing risk profiles.
Yeah, but going back to the Venice system, for example, is one I know. Is literally it's
the most system.
It's it's the most system. I mean, which that I don't know is about 4 meters or 5 meters in height. I don't know exactly now in feet how much would be, but definitely they could be bigger. And so, is that something you ever even explore, envision as a possibility? Like a similar system which will completely disappear because they will be submerged by water.
Well, there have been some pretty substantial cost overruns with the construction of that. We've actually had meetings with some of the professors that were involved with the design and the plans for the MOST system. So I think we would consider it as we do an evaluation of what type of gate structures might work most feasibly for this area. But I don't want to get too far ahead of it to say, oh yeah, that's absolutely what we would do. Right now, our current thinking is that a sector gate for this area would be probably the most durable, resilient, easy to maintain structure that might work for this location. But, you know, we certainly have not made a hard and fast decision on it. It's just based on engineering judgment and what existing information we know for the area. So it's possible. It's too early to say definitively in response to your question.
Okay, I wish it would be, you know, definitely, even through taxes, we have a lot of development that they're not going to pay taxes for a long time. I wish this system, you know, better technology could be used. Sometimes the easy solution.
I do too.
they have that impact of Steve was talking about, and I would not be personally in support of something like that, but I will be definitely in support of more technology, even if it is more costly, because I believe it's incomparable to the benefit of having our landscape and our environment not be contaminated. And also the impact we could have in the ecosystem, which we're trying to revive in this last decade. So that's all. That's my question. Thank you for the answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Thanks a lot, Sante. That was really great. Okay, gonna move over to general public. Joe, you've been incredibly patient. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Steve. First of all, I just want to quickly say I'm really happy to see the granular level of mitigation that's being described here. I was not expecting, honestly, after trying to get information for a couple of years on this, I wasn't expecting this level of detail. And I guess a part of it, of course, is because of our proximity to the toxic creek, which I guess is a blessing and a curse. So ultimately, I'm happy to see how much mitigation is planned. However, my first question is the shaded green areas, just to clarify, are those based on current flood projections or future flood projections if nothing was done?
That's the flood projection in the future, assuming the intermediate sea level rise with what is referred to as the 1% flood event, otherwise known as the 100-year storm event.
Okay, because currently I have flood maps that show the current FEMA flood maps show flooding. I don't know what the percentage flooding plan, but it's a zone 1, I believe 1A, that at the very south end of the projected sea wall, the purple is the seawall. Is that correct? The very south end goes to Greenpoint Avenue. So that covers 11 blocks basically from Commercial to Greenpoint. If it was extended 5 additional blocks to the south, it would actually protect the entire area of Greenpoint. Obviously, I have selfish interests in that because I live in those 5 blocks. It would extend to the Bushwick Inlet Park, the Bushwick Inlet, which did in fact flood significantly during Sandy, out onto Kent Avenue. But from that point south, there's an extended period of park called Bushwick Inlet Park, which I believe a lot of it is meant to be flooded. Ultimately, it's being designed that way. So I would propose that extending the seawall 5 additional blocks would protect a significantly larger area of Greenpoint, or actually just close the gate essentially on Greenpoint. And I understand that this is going to happen everywhere you go. Everyone's going to want to extend it. But what I suspect is that the water will find its way, in fact, in a higher volume south of that wall, simply because of the induced flooding plan, which will end up flooding the entire south end, residential south end of Greenpoint. So obviously you can't make that decision right now, but I'm putting it out there. The seawall should be extended to the inlet.
It's a very good comment. No, thank you.
Thank you.
All comments are good, and we welcome them as
Thanks,
many
Joe.
as.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Margot.
Thanks, Steve, and thank you for the presentation. I think that there are 2 different kinds of flooding events. There are surge events, and then there's rainfall, Sandy versus Ida. So
Sure.
how, if we were to have both of them simultaneously, how would closing the gate and putting up these walls affect the rain event and flooding that comes from that?
That's an excellent question. We actually do, there typically is maybe not for this area because it doesn't have the delay, but Rainfall events more on the other tributaries like the Hudson. There's a lag from when that rainfall occurs to when it hits this area from when the storm surge from the ocean hits the area. So there's a different phasing on it. But in areas like this, we have assumed a fairly severe amount of rainfall coincident with the operation of the gates. And so we have included within our cost estimates costs for dealing with interior drainage to the extent that it should occur, or dealing with that rainfall as it's coming into the Newtown Creek behind the closed storm surge gates. So it's different for each area. For example, in Jamaica Bay, the store has capacity for a pretty tremendous amount of water inflows, and so it actually allows for CSOs to still operate. Now, I don't know that that would still be the case in Newtown Creek because it is a fairly confined waterway. And as I mentioned, you know, the wastewater treatment plant itself might cause flooding just from its discharge, much less all the CSO discharges that align along the creek itself. But to the extent that, you know, we would incorporate within this design pump stations or capacity for being able to deal with the interior drainage that would occur coincident with this coastal storm surge. That's a very good question. There is an engineering appendix that speaks to this. Remember the appendix number, but it's described as interior drainage, and it's on our website. I'd refer you to it if you'd like to look for more information on that.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Margot. Bella. Bella, I saw your hand up, or did you have a comment or a question? Are you still not, we're still not able to hear you, unfortunately. And if you want to call the office again and relay your comment. In the meantime, is that you, Erica or Evelyn?
Good evening. I think I just have a question. So this way, honestly, so I can sleep at night, because this gives me nightmares in the future. So we live approximately maybe 2 to 3 blocks from the plant, the sewage plant, and we experience really more frequent flooding. I mean, the Ida, we have pictures. We live on Nassau Avenue. We live over Will Creek, and the block was flooded. We know neighbors. The basement's completely flooded, and you know, this just listening to this all night just gives me more anxiety altogether. But your opinion, if you live near the plant, there's always been rumors over the years. People always used to say whenever we'd have big storms, you know, people the old timers used to say, you know, who knows what the plant used to do, and you just didn't know how it affects the plant. How would these gates or whatever projects are coming forward affect the people that are living near the plant, like really within a certain radius? Will we have more flooding? I mean, it's inevitable, I'm sure, but just your opinion, how
from coastal flood events, you would have less flooding. Now, Ida was a very anomalous.
Yeah, I could.
wait, hold on. One more question.
It's not a question. It's just. It's not.
You guys are cutting out. You can't hear Evelyn right now.
No, go ahead. Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Can you hear us now?
Hi.
Okay.
Let me just put my eyeglasses on so I can see the information. Sorry
Hold on.
about that.
She's putting on her glasses.
I had this past August, Erica was flipping through channels on the TV, and we came across a New York City council meeting. It was a testimony given by the New York City DEP commissioner and also by the chief operating officer, Vincent Spear. What the heck's his name?
Don't worry
again?
about it.
And what I feel is important for those to watch is this testimony, if you go to the New York City Council hearings, go back to August 16th, 2022, and you'll hear all about the resiliency and infrastructure that the commissioner himself even talks about. And he even had some input regarding the HAT study. And also, if people are not familiar, to go to the New York City DEP rainfall ready, that came up right after Ida. They came up with that. So you have to see the active, the flood maps for now, for later, 50 years later down the road, and they're interactive flood maps. And unfortunately, we are in one of the blue areas in the moderate current maps. So I just advise strongly to watch that city council testimony going back to 8/16/20 this year, 2022, and go to the rainfall ready. It's not that easy to find those maps, but if you do a little research, you can just find interactive maps. And to how, when you look at all that flooding that shows on these maps current, and then when you talk about the induced flooding, it's very scary. That's
Thank you for the information.
And we want to thank the community board, especially this committee, for all their hard work, the Newtown Creek Alliance, because if it weren't for the people in the community of fighting and being aware of all these issues, so many people, I can assure you this, people are oblivious to this. They won't even have any concepts. So the thing is, like we're talking about media coverage or just maybe getting it out, people aren't going to understand it. But as we always used to say, if it doesn't affect you, you don't care about it. But the past couple of storms, it's every time it rains or you have cells and stuff like that, you just bless yourself and you just hope that you don't see it coming down the block. So when we watch this, it's we just need to understand it in layman's terms, so this way it reduces your concern about it. And just please, whatever you do, pick the best plan, pick the best contractors, please evaluate the studies, don't overlook it, because a lot of people will be depending on their futures down the road. And I feel for the next generation. I really do. I'm in my 50s, my mother's seasoned, but we think about the next generations, what they're really going to face. And it's, if people don't think this is real, it's, but thank you, everybody.
And thank you, Steve, for heading this meeting.
Bye.
Thanks so much, you guys, for your comments and your participation. It's all, this neighborhood's amazing, the way we come together to face issues. Yeah, I think we need to finish up this issue. We're approaching 9 o'clock and we have one more item, but I would just, going back to, planning for the engineering for the future, predicting the future. My brother lives in New Orleans, and he said that the levees that they rebuilt in response to Hurricane Katrina's destruction they're already failing because they underestimated sea level rise and land subsidence there. So fortunately, they're able, I think, to build, fortify what's there, but seems like to Eric and Evelyn's points, they underestimated I assume, it's very, I guess, known unknowns, predicting atmospheric conditions in the future. But is that a study area informing the thinking on this project?
Yeah, I wish we had a crystal ball for it.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question. In that presentation, when I go to look at it and you're talking about the storyboard, or the story maps, does that include, research and sort of exploration of alternative plans, including, say, what was referenced by Sante, like managed retreat, like what would happen if you spent the, billions of dollars on something more radical, or, that would be. So I was just wondering, are there explorations there that you can look at?
We do have on that story map website details on all the alternatives going down to almost the street level. When it comes to a more non-structural approach, particularly for this vast study area, given how urbanized it is with a managed retreat, that is a far more expensive endeavor. And we have looked at it in concert with some of these structural measures that we have here. But largely it was, deemed infeasible just because the cost for trying to do that much purchasing of properties to have a managed retreat vastly overwhelms the cost. I mean, that would very likely be more in the, hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars, given the vastness of the study or in the urbanization of it. But that being said, that's not to say that there might be areas where we do have approaches for doing that, and we will be looking at that in further detail in terms of trying to complement and further enhance the plan, whatever plan has gone forward with in the study.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic because the idea that is so expensive is that the value was created by all the upzoning recently, and that has created, the value of the property that now is, so threatened.
Yeah, I wish people did not live so much in harm's way, but we have to deal with things as they are, I guess.
That's a great question, Catherine. Thank you. Erica, Evelyn, did you have something else you want to add? No, just, okay, you still have your hand up. All right, I think we're going to close out the discussion here so we can move on. Bryce, thank you very, very much for your presentation and fielding our questions. It's really, really kind of, sorry, the term watershed moment to in terms of dealing with climate. Our chickens have come home to roost big time with addressing this. So yeah, so committee members, yeah, as Eric said, I mean, there's just so much here to absorb, to contemplate, to unpack, and it's 9:03. I'm glad to hear that there was a consideration of extending the comment submission deadline. I would wholeheartedly support that because I wish Jan Peterson was here. I feel like she, the channeler, just in terms of the kind of discussions we need to have right now as a community and as a city, these really, really critical, tough choices that we need to make here, affecting our community and what the consequences, what we're offsetting in terms of what we want to recommend in terms of especially our shoreline or access to our waterfront, et cetera. Yeah, because I hear the people is like, well, Mother Nature doesn't care about our view. People have made some really, I think, great comments and questions that are noted. I think that could be part of our comment, but I feel like we need more time to digest this. So I just wonder, they consider the comment would be for reasons X, Y, Z, ABC, request the Corps extend the deadline. How do folks feel about that?
I agree with that.
I do too.
And then at some point, we can dedicate an entire meeting to discussing this. I feel like something the full board, really should discuss, or just as a larger community, just, I know it's just like weighing values and priorities, but what it'll potentially do to our parks, it's for survival. So we're going to lose our view and affect our experience in our parks. Some might consider destructive to our parks, and especially Bushwick Inlet Park. The amount of sweat equity put into saving that park, but the amount of investment into creating that park is staggering. So the idea that somehow that would be damaged, so even though it's down river or upriver from where the infrastructure is being installed. So yeah, so I guess we'll make a motion that just in light of the gravity and the enormity of this proposal, that we request that the Corps extend the deadline at least a few months, so the community can properly weigh in on the proposal. I guess that's a motion.
I
William Vega
second that.
seconds.
Wait, did someone say something before that?
That was two of us. Laura can go ahead.
Okay.
I second it. Thanks.
Okay. I just want to make sure see if there are any other committee members that came in. Okay. All right, just quickly get up my sheet here. Okay. Steve Chesler, yes. Eric Brusadis,
Yes.
Ori Canton, Katie Denny, Yoel Lowe, Trina McKeever,
Yes.
Jan Peterson, Bella Sable. If you can relay your vote to Joanna and William Vega.
Yes, I think she has a sign there, Steve. It says yes. That's old school. It works.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Bella.
It sure does.
Very old school. Okay. And non-committee members, Laura.
Yes.
Okay. And Kevin Costa and Kay Stewart. Okay.
Darn it, I
So-
should have held up a sign.
Well, get a placard with two, yes and no on either side of it. Okay. That passes unanimously. No votes, no abstentions. So that's great. And again, thank you, Bryce, and thank you, the partners, members of the partners who attended tonight. So we'll be discussing this obviously further in the future. Look forward to more discussions, but yeah, I guess saying it's a wake-up call is definitely not even close to covering it, but I knew this point was coming at some point. So anyhow, moving on to our final, good night, have a good night, Bryce and everyone. 315 Berry Street. Just quickly summarizing, it was a Board of Standards and Appeals application for a special permit to install a energy storage system, aka battery storage system, on the rooftop of a residential loft building. The current zoning, which I remember seems to be R6, does not allow that. So Microgrid Networks, who is the procurer and creator of these systems and wants to install it on the roof, is seeking this special permit. As part of that review process, there was a joint meeting of the Land Use Committee of Community Board 1 and the Environmental Protection Committee. Heard lots of testimony and received written testimony from tenants in the building. And after rigorous discussion with the building owner and Microgrid Networks, both committees recommended to the full board against approving the special permit for numerous reasons, including lots of questions just about the safety of that system, whether the building, the roof could support it, whether the facade of the building, which was seriously deteriorating, if that the physical structure of the building was affecting that. So inevitably the board unanimously, overwhelmingly approved that recommendation, and that went to BSA. But that application is ongoing. And just summarizing, it seems like I did watch a couple of the hearings online with the previous chair of that agency, who had, and they amplified those concerns, basically around safety and quality of life. And the applicant revised their application, relocated part of the system on the ground, and adjusted the configuration so there would be better access proper access for the fire department. Who I saw in the revised application, which was forwarded to everyone, that they approved essentially sanctioned it, with that being able to have the access they feel is needed, et cetera. And I feel like the building, DOB informed them that the building will support the system. That said, the tenants of the building have written the board, and it was forwarded to the committee, and just noted some concerning developments that the Marjorie Perlmutter, who was the chair of that bureau, was not reappointed as chair. So now there's one of the commissioners is acting chair. And I don't know if you saw the 2 video clips that were passed along, but previously all these concerns were front and center and core to the BSA's decision. Subsequently, with the new administration, they said those are still a great concern to us, but our primary concern is the zoning. It's more, a zoning question where this is allowable, and we're going to leave it up to other agencies to determine, to deal with the safety and quality of life issues. And Joanna reached out to the BSA to find out where they are in the process and what the board's role could potentially be at this point. The applicant is not required to come back to the community board, even though their application has been revised. But he said we could request that they come back to the board to present and discuss the situation. So I know there are people here from the public who wanted to discuss the situation. I just want to add 2 more facets to this. After the community board submitted their recommendation, Capolino, who's, who represents the applicant, asked if I would act as a mediator between the residents and microgrid and the landlord. And in the process, Chairperson Fuller and our former district manager were provided with research on a horrible accident in Arizona involving a battery storage system out there, where it was, it was a ground structure that caught on fire, and the unfortunately a number of firemen were horribly injured through that. There was an explosion, and based on that, Chairperson Fuller felt there's just no way that they would support this application and allowing the chair of the Environmental Protection Committee to participate in that. I noticed that the former chair, Perlmutter of the BSA, also cited that. I did my own research, and what Microgrid Networks did note is that the system they're proposing for 315 Berry is different. It's a different chemical and composition of the batteries, and so what happened in Arizona doesn't really apply. The typical lithium-ion battery is, the lithium is paired with cadmium and nickel. Their system will utilize lithium and iron. And initially I thought, yeah, those are rarely susceptible to thermal runaway that causes these horrible fires like the e-bike batteries that are catching on fire and causing structural fires throughout the city at a really alarming rate. Utilize that chemical combination. But I did some research, and there was in 2019 a terrible fire in China with a energy storage system that utilized batteries with lithium, with a lithium iron combination. The cause of the fire has not been determined. Like what it was, it was battery failure, system failure, overload, et cetera. There were lots of proposals, theories about why it happened, but they could not substantiate one or the other. But still, it just raises an amazing concern. So that said, I'd like to know the committee to theorize about what we want to do. I want to hear if attendees of the meeting tonight want to add to the discussion, pass along your comments to the committee that you submitted in writing. I just want to say one thing that I'm considering is just only the fire department said this is safe because they're creating proper access to the roof. But they don't really address the inherent safety of the system itself. And so, I have a couple ideas. So I was suggesting that we write to FDNY about, in regard to this application, saying you're aware of this accident that happened in China, or like, can you, it's one thing getting to a fire like this, but can you extinguish a fire properly like this before it gets to some catastrophic level, and what that is, and or recommend to the land use committee and the board that we request the microgrid networks come back to the board and address that. So that's, kind of, I want to just kind of lay the ground a little bit about what has happened in the past and some of the data that's come in. I think maybe why don't we hear from some of the folks who've waited almost 3 hours here I really appreciate your patience, but we had two very significant items before this, but this is equally significant. So for those who want to speak, I see some of you've already raised your hands, but if you haven't, if you could utilize the WebEx hand raising function. So first I see Chris.
Yes, thanks. I just raised my hand earlier because I wanted to provide a little more information on the fire in Beijing that you mentioned. It took place in 2021. If we're talking about the same one, it did have the exact same battery composition, which is called LFP or lithium iron phosphate, as the ones proposed by Microgrid. That fire raged for many hours. 2 firefighters were killed. It was an installation on a commercial mall, again, a rooftop installation. And then the other thing I wanted to note was that the after incident report of the Arizona fire you cited, where 9 firefighters were grievously injured, one blown some 100 feet from the explosion into a chain link fence. Luckily, all of these firefighters did survive. But that after incident report noted that it cited lithium ion batteries as a whole as being, quote, inherently unstable. And I would also point out that Rebecca Barr, who is a safety officer of Microgrid at one of the hearings before the BSA, said that the lithium iron phosphate batteries that they use do not catch fire and explode like other batteries. The Beijing fire took place 3 days after she said that. And I think one of the things that she was citing was a United UL 9540A, which is a standard safety report for these batteries. And it is a threshold that measures the propensity for runaway fire, but it does not eliminate the possibility of it. So what they do is they take a single cell and they bring it to a certain temperature, ignite it, and observe whether or not there is runaway ignition of the battery system. It is not a carte blanche of safety for the battery or anything further. So I'll just stop there with those preliminary bits of
Thank
information.
you. Chris, for the record, can you tell me your last name, please?
Last name is Quirk, Q-U-I-R-K, like Quirk of Fate. I'm a resident at 315 with my wife, Amy, for about 25 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, anyone else who would like to speak or weigh in? Okay. So committee members, so Chris is basically, oh, here's Steve Silver.
You need to unmute yourself.
Apologies, sorry. Even though the fire department has somehow approved this and that the administration wants to be perceived as kind of supporting green ideas, if we were to go down to the local firehouse and ask the regular fire department guys, the firefighters who would be tasked to fight this fire, they would all be opposed to it because there's no way to put out these kind of fires. They just rage. And if this happens to explode, if there's a lightning strike or some failure, they're going to have to go up to the roof and risk their lives to put out a fire that can't be put out. Okay, a Tesla caught fire recently, very recently. It took 2 hours to put out the fire. They used, I don't know how many thousands of gallons of water. If there were to be a fire on our roof, with the equivalent, as Chris Quirk mentioned the last time, of 30,000 batteries on our roof, the equivalent, okay, they would have to use millions of gallons of water to put out this fire, which would effectively collapse the roof. So the idea that they're going to put some kind of system on top of my head, actually, is totally insane. And the only now the other part of it is that they're claiming that Con Ed needs 3,000 megawatts of energy by 2027, and this system is going to provide 3 megawatts of energy. So the cost benefit and the risk involved doesn't make sense at all. Okay, they're not going to provide any energy for anything particular, but they're going to line their pockets with tremendous monies from Con Ed and the city and all of the rest of this stuff. And that's what it's really all about. It's really all about a kind of gigantic holding company in California who sees the opportunity to make money. They couldn't figure out any other place in Williamsburg to put this, because out of the 200 sites they examined, only 2 landlords decided that it was a good idea to put these batteries anywhere near their place, except for our landlord and some other guy. Okay, so this is all about money. It has nothing to do about anything else but money. And these guys out in California stand to make a lot of money, and that's what they're all about. And if you want to further explore this idea, you can ask one of our companions who live in the building, Benny Rubin, who's an expert on that kind of stuff. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Steve Silver. Just confirming you're a tenant in 315 Berry.
I've been a tenant since 1980.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, Paige.
All right. Great. Thank you so much. I just wanted to point out again, sort of picking up on what Steve had to say, that this is, you know, the first time that they're trying to get a variance like this through. This is would be the first time anywhere in the world, as far as we know, that something like this would be put on a residential building roof, and that this is something that they're planning to do a lot more of, that they're wanting to do as a stopgap for their flow issues, for their not having enough of a enough to get lines to get power from their station to this neighborhood. And so to me, I guess I'm just really shocked that in a time when we are questioning lithium ion technology safety, that we are that this seems to be just going ahead, and that we as a tenants group of, fairly poor group of people, of artists who live in this sort of decaying building, are the ones who are responsible for pointing out that this is unsafe, because, if we don't fight it, then this is going to be a precedent that's going to be set, that's going to go everywhere. So yeah, we don't want it on our heads, but also, do we want this in New York City in residential buildings, on top of residential buildings, in a moment when already we're fighting fires just from a much smaller source that, as you pointed out, is not very stable, the bike batteries, but it's still, as Chris pointed out, a similar technology, and it's a much larger scale. And it's also in a place where these fires are not going to be able to be fought. The fire department does not have helicopters. It doesn't really have a way to access that area. So, and I think that it's a real safety concern for the whole city. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Paige. Is anyone else who?
Olivia. Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Olivia Silver. I'm also on the 7th floor. So, like my father said, this is gonna go right on top of my head, 24/7. So added on top, and I think for everyone in the building, you are going to have to live with this kind of uncertainty of, is the building gonna catch fire and explode today, or tomorrow, or who knows when. And the logistics of the fire department's approval of this, to me, like many facets of this project, make no sense at all on why the fire department would approve this. Like people have said, there's a lot of economic and political pressure to kind of, approve a project like this because it sounds good. There's a lot of money backing it. It seems green, when in reality, that was this kind of marketing farce that really had nothing to do with it. But the amount of water weight that would be pumped on top of that roof would be over 1.5 million pounds of water. To say that that wouldn't collapse the roof is ridiculous. That amount of water would, far exceeds the load capacity that that roof was intended for. The other thing is that and I wrote this in an email to Mr. Chesler, but I think I'll reiterate it here, that the water system, the emergency sprinkler system implemented on these battery boxes is a dry system. So it would have to be manually triggered by the fire department upon arrival to the site. So were there to be a fire, we would have to wait for the fire department to arrive on site in order to then make the decision on whether to trigger the water to put out the fire. So you're talking 5 to 10 minutes, and it takes 10 minutes for a battery and thermal runaway to reach its full heat capacity. These batteries are going to be on a steel dunnage on a platform kind of, I think, 6 feet up high. That amount of heat would melt the platform. So the batteries are going to at some point or another fall on top of the roof inevitably. That amount of heat is also puts in peril the concrete slab that makes up the roof itself, which is what is separating this system from my house, from the rest of the building. So there's two big issues there also with how the fire department could deal with the fire, and were they to deal at all, if they were to arrive 5, 6, 7 minutes and not make a decision there, it's already too late, probably. So what they're telling us is, okay, this has not ever been done before, but we're risking it, and kind of let's see what happens on a building where there's 51 residential units, where there's little kids living, there's families, there's my father, who's lived there for over 40 years, a building that's right next to a playground where all the little kids from the local schools go for recess. Some of this equipment is going to be placed literally right next to the fence that separates the loading dock of the building from the playground. So it's very problematic and kind of an insane idea to have this up there. And I think everyone is just kind of going off, writing this off as code. Kind of BSA is saying, well, the fire department is going to look at the safety aspect. The fire department is saying, no, that's all the BSA. So no one is kind of clear on who's supposed to be looking out for the tenants here. At the last BSA hearing, Chair Chandra said that this was now a landlord-tenant issue. That is absolutely ridiculous, since our landlord signed this lease without telling anyone and now wants absolutely nothing to do with this and has been absolutely negligent, in the past. So it's just an alarming situation and kind of very heartbreaking for me to have this happening, to my house. And I think for all of us here that we're fighting so hard to feel safe at home, it's just, depressing. But yeah, this shouldn't be happening. This has no place being near residences as it's being proposed to be. So, yeah.
Thank you, Olivia, and also thank you for connecting with the board about the further developments here.
Yeah, thank you for hearing us out.
William, did you?
Yes. So Steve, did you say all the fire departments said that they approve it because it's accessible to get into the roof? Something about the equipment? Is that what the
fire department, as far as I know, signed off on this project. The upper echelons of the fire department, even though, when we're at meetings at the BSA, the guy from the fire department said, they were looking at it, and basically this guy said, no, it wasn't a good idea. But, somebody up the line is saying yes to this project. Now, I will say to you, the former deputy mayor of the city, Diana Rayner, was hired by Microgrid as a consultant. Now, why was Diana Rayner hired as a consultant? She's a pal of Mr. Adams, and she's totally politically connected. So, I mean, this is a political idea that's taking place. It's got nothing to do with the neighborhood, with the park next door, with a bunch of little kids from, the miniature kids running around there during the daytime, with a bunch of more than 150 residents living in the building. You know, they're going to put this crazy idea up on top of the roof. And if you ask anybody down at the fire station if they think it's a good idea, they're going to tell you it's crazed because they can't even put a goddamn motorcycle out. Okay? It's too much. So, I mean, you know, it's safe until it blows up. And then nobody's going to be responsible for this. Nobody, because it's a bunch of rich guys from Harvard out in California who are running this thing. Okay, Microgrid is a fake kind of company. They have an office here. They're from Brooklyn. They're not from anywhere. They're from California. That's the money coming from California to plug into these green ideas. Now, the fire department, who knows what's going on, you know, on the levels of higher levels of the city government, why they want to do this kind of idea. They're panicked about energy in the city. Okay, maybe that's a real idea, but why don't they put it on the ground someplace? Okay, they can find some place underground to put it. But like, as I said, there were 200 sites, okay, that Microgrid identified, and only 2 people agreed out of 200 sites to bother with this idea because it's too fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so I hear you, Mr. Silver. I just wanted from Steve. We have the actual document that FDNY said this is approved? Doesn't make sense to me.
Yes, it's included in Microgrid's application. There's a letter from FDNY.
Could you
Basically, yeah.
Could you forward that to the committee, or do we already received it?
Yeah, it was in that when from Lobel, he sent the revised application.
Okay, I'm going to double check.
I can pull up my copy, but it's about they prove because due to access. Remember the reconfiguration of the system on the roof with public access versus the system, and the what am I missing? The structural whether the building can withstand the load from the system, but they did not address any of what's being discussed tonight in terms of how to put the fire out.
Yeah, I mean that's
it's astounding. Really,
that's the most important information we're looking for FDNY. Their job is to protect our neighbors, and our job is to support our neighbors. Thank you.
Yeah. So see more hands up. So I'm trying to think who was first. Elizabeth hasn't spoken yet, so I'll let her go next. You're muted, Elizabeth.
Unmute, Elizabeth.
Still can't hear you, Elizabeth.
She's still muted.
All right. We'll come back to you, Elizabeth, if you can figure out unmuting yourself. Chris, Laura, let's go Laura Hoffman.
Sorry about that. While everybody was talking, I looked on the HPD website and I see that the owner currently has 56 violations, building violations, and 3 past litigations. That's just on the HPD website. So that signals an owner that's not going to do the right thing.
Okay. How's Elizabeth doing? Elizabeth, you able to, any luck unmuting?
She's still muted.
Still muted, sorry.
Oh, wait, she's unmuted now.
Okay, yeah, looks like you're free. But we can't hear you. Sorry.
We can't hear you, Elizabeth.
I still can't hear you. What we do is just disconnect and reconnect, and we'll catch you in a couple minutes. All right, that sometimes works. All right.
I guess.
Chris, did you have further comment?
Yeah, not to hog the mic, but just a couple things about the fire department issues we're discussing with regard to numbers. I will say, just as a brief preamble, when we heard from the fire department at the BSA meetings, they'd made a list of 39 steps that microgrid was going to have to fix before they would approve it, this application, and issue the letter of no objection, which is what you have on file there. Somehow, miraculously, in a matter of 3 months at the next meeting, they had satisfied all of these, but none of these details were made evident to us at the meeting. So we have some questions about the process, especially since at the meeting, the fire department officials were more circumspect than I had ever seen them with regard to their capacity to deal with potential problems of this battery array. So the fact that all of a sudden we have a letter of no objection coming out and not much transparency as to how these steps were resolved gives us some pause. A little back of the envelope math with regard to the Tesla fire that Steve mentioned, that was a 1,000-pound battery. The fire department in the news report said it took 12,000 gallons of water to put it out. There's going to be something like 300,000 pounds worth of battery alone on the roof under the current proposal. They're 18,000 pounds each of battery, these cubes, and there's 15 of them currently proposed. At that rate, it on the order of, by my calculations, if it's comparable to the Tesla, give or take, around 500,000 cubic feet of water. That is an acre of water 10 feet deep. Two questions I would have was, A, how is the fire department going to get that much water up there? In terms of what they mentioned they were able to deliver, it was nothing close to that in any kind of reasonable amount of time. And the second thing, where's it going to go? They had a specialist consultant mention that they're going to put in some scuppers for the flow and that everything would be fine and a few inches of water would accumulate, but it would all be washed off and would not overload the limit of the building. But the fixtures themselves are pretty close to the limit of what the Department of Buildings has as the load limit for the floors already. Start adding on 3, 4, 5, 6 inches of water across 10,000 square feet of roof space. And I don't care how quickly you drain it. It seems to me like you've got a problem. And this goes to our engineering questions as well, which would probably be best addressed at the DOB. But I just want to add those 2 points. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chris. Olivia, did you want to add something more? We have to wrap up soon.
Yeah, just 2 points about the roof, which I think Marjorie Perlmutter had always wanted to clarify and which we'd brought up. The first being, which I mean is not super important, but that by law the roof is intended as a recreational rooftop for tenant use. So they're denying us of that privilege. Were we wanting to use it? Because I don't know who would want to go and hang out near these kinds of batteries with all the kind of gases and who knows what that they're emitting constantly, and also the possibility that they might blow up and catch on fire while you're potentially sitting there, as Marjorie Perlmutter liked to say, reading the paper on a Sunday morning. And the other thing is that the roof is our main fire egress. So what's happening here is that they're adding a tremendous fire risk to the building, and they are also removing our main egress, which makes absolutely no sense. So yeah, those are.
Okay. All right. Steve Silver, did you have?
No, not at
Okay.
the moment.
Oh, your hand's still raised. Okay.
Oh.
So maybe we'll close out the discussion there. Trying to theorize how to proceed. If we want to recommend, sending a letter to FDNY and or to BSA, or to request microgrid come back to the community board. I just don't know, and invite FDNY to the board to address a lot of these concerns and questions. But if I understand is BSA is reconvening about, they'll be addressing his application again in January. So I just want to be mindful of the time cycle and when our board meets. So
I think, Steve, the crucial is FDNY.
right.
That's what our neighbors are relying on for protection, and for everything I'm hearing, they're at risk. So I think they need to answer these questions.
Steve, is the BSA meeting after our January board meeting or before?
I believe so. Joanna, do you remember when that meeting is?
Because that would give us another meeting cycle to vote on.
No, I don't, but I'll check for you and I'll let you know.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm feeling like we should issue a letter. We should just, go straight up. And we could write them back in here and hash it out. But I feel like their response is predictable. So I'm just trying, I think, it's definitely in order to get on FDNY, but I just thinking that we should also communicate with, express our concerns to the BSA directly as well.
Could we do both? Could we invite
Yes.
the BSA to a January or early January or late December board meeting, but also send a letter right away to
Yeah, I like that. We could, issue our letter to FDNY, and then we could do is write a comment to the BSA informing them that's what we're doing. I feel like they should, be, just be mindful of, they should expect this response and actually, consider it in their decision-making. I'm sorry, tired and troubled. But anyhow.
Can I ask, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
In what capacity is the BSA, expected to take into account matters of safety in a situation like this? Like, to what extent must they consider an issue at this point? Can they say that they're going to just look at this as strictly zoning after, months of intense concerns from all the members on that board about the structural condition of the building, about fire issues, about all that, to suddenly say that now they're going to look at this narrowly on a zoning level? How can they do that? Can that be expected of them now?
My experience with them is limited, but I would say, from what I gather, they seem to have leeway, and there's just, because you're dealing with variances and special circumstances. But to me, even with the zoning issue, it's really about compatible uses. It's just like when you have often with loft buildings where you have manufacturing going on, you have people living above the manufacturing and what that might be involved with. There's issues with that, and I feel like this seems to ring similar to that. So I just wonder if we preemptively consider other agencies. I don't know if it's bring OER into this or in terms of just the pure safety issue, but I mean, that's a really good question. I feel like we're just an advisory body, but I feel like we should impress that point that this just seems so incompatible to have this system installed on the roof of residential building, with these very critical, kind of disturbing questions out there about the safety of a system like this. So, yeah, we got to wrap up. Steve, did you have something quick to add?
What,
to that?
Steve?
I would,
Steve, there's one person that hasn't spoken. That's Teresa Dillon.
Oh, hi. How are you?
Oh, sorry, Teresa.
It's okay. I just wanted to make a quick comment. I know I joined in late because I was at work, so apologies. But so I didn't know if this was already covered. But in lieu of what William was just saying in regards to the fire department being sort of the most important sort of first step here, I mean, being that the news cycle is pretty heavy right now, sort of the right timing for us, being that they're in discussion right now with the FDNY regarding these lithium batteries that are so like dot in the middle of Earth compared to what would be going on this Earth. It seems pretty much like this is the right time to be sort of discussing that with them. Because if that's being a big deal to the city, then this should be an extreme urgency. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Are you, Teresa, are you a tenant at 315?
Yeah, I've been here for 24 years on the 6th floor.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay.
Mr. Chesler, I found out the date. The hearing is January 9th and 10th.
Okay.
Okay.
And our full board meeting is
The 10th.
okay. That's tight. So, well, theoretically we could do both, but I feel like it's just this 1-2 punch of these two letters coming from the board. Because yeah, that's what folks feel differently.
Yeah, both letters, but I think FDNY is the crucial one because they, no matter what the Board of Standards Appeals says, if this turns out to be a safety issue, you have to think FDNY will rule.
Right.
But by the time the board can write a letter in January, the BSA meeting will have already taken place.
Right, because we'll be meeting the evening of
The 10th.
the 10th.
But we will have had our committee meeting and maybe, I don't know.
When is the next executive committee meeting?
For this month, December 14th.
Are there exceptional circumstances where executive committee would approve releasing letters on behalf of the board?
There have been, I know in the past.
Yeah.
That's the path.
To bring it up to the executive board, right?
Okay. I'll make a point to attend the meeting and fill them in. So, but let's proceed with that. So, to issue a letter to FDNY, asking them, all these various very critical bullet points about what is the plan for extinguishing fire from a system that is proposed for 315 Berry, considering the volume of water that's needed to extinguish a fire. A lithium-ion system, of this size.
And the timing with the dry system, the timing.
Yeah, the timing of access to the roof, the dry system has to be manually initiated. And citing include reference to the fire in China at the department store that used a very similar battery makeup. And just a question how, it just seems like anyone with 1 ounce of common sense would wonder how a proposal like this could be approved for a residential building, And I'll just go say I'm all for going all in on renewables and, losing fossil fuels and just moving into a new era. And we just had a really disturbing conversation with the Army Corps of Engineers about basically waving a white flag with what we're going to do to our shorelines and our waterways. But to put a battery storage system, a volatile, risky system on top of residential building is not going to help us get there. If so, anyway, that's a really long proposal for a motion. Yes.
Steve, one more. This is be the first attempt to do this on a residential building. Am I correct? That should be put there because there's no history of this being done successfully, and on a residential.
Okay.
And so the thought is we write that letter to the FDNY with those, asking them to come to a January meeting with answers to those questions or to discuss that. And that letter will be copied to the BSA. Send a copy of that letter will be sent.
No,
to
not
the BSA.
quite. What I would say is reissue this letter to FDNY. Basically, how can you approve this system? Safety issues. How can you distinguish, just considering the volatility of an e-bike battery that's caused 200 fires just this year alone, citing the fire in the Chinese, the department store in China, similar system, manual initiation, all these various bullet points. What is the impetus? What is the reasoning to basically not object to this system being installed on this residential building? So that'd be number one. Number two, informing the BSA that we have all these concerns and really, reiterate our disapproval to this application, but and that the board consider that, especially in light of these unanswered questions, FDNY, and then send a copy of our letter, include of the fire department letter. That's what I was thinking. I mean, is that like basically, how can you approve this knowing that these questions are answered and these concerns are right in front of you? And that, to Olivia's point, you absolutely must consider compatible uses with having this energy system on the roof with a building full of human beings who live there. So,
hey, Steve, I just want to kind of clarify. So the executive committee is not usually willing to approve letters during the months where the board is in session. It's usually only happens, over the summer, like July, August. So we should probably just, have this letter go out after next week's full board meeting, and then just submit comments late to the BSA.
oh yeah, oh my God, yeah.
January.
We have our meeting next month. We have our meeting.
The
6th.
7th, 6th, yeah.
So
the 6th.
So just
6th,
forget everything I just said. I'm sorry.
But motion to approve that letter.
We don't need the executive committee. We have the
Second, I second it.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. And thank you, everyone, for bearing. So, okay. I'm sorry. Who made the motion? Who seconded the motion?
Eric first, and then I second.
Okay. Steve Chesler, yes. Eric Mercedes.
Yes.
Trina Kiever.
Yes.
Is Bella still online? Her vote?
Use the same page.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Bella. William?
Yes.
Vega, yes. Laura Hoffman?
Yes.
And that's everyone. So it's unanimous. Yes, no no's. No abstention. The motion carries. So I will I'll draft a letter with bullet points that I'll include in my report for so something concrete for the board to approve. Okay. All right. So, so, 315 Barry, we hear you. We're trying to do what we can with our, unfortunately, our limited power as an advisory board, but we'll try and make some noise about this. It's really just some really nefarious forces, I feel like, at work here. So yeah. If I don't, quick, well, it's 10 o'clock. Old business. Does anybody have any old business? New business. A combination old nude is Joanna told me that the EPA has agreed to come to the full board in January to speak about, provide an update on the Newtown Creek Superfund site. So that's great. Thank you, Joanna, for persisting with that.
And the intention, Steve, of the letter would be that the FDNY would come and we would discuss the Berry Street situation as well, if we can get them to come. Right.
Yeah, you want to invite them to a committee meeting or to the full board, or
what do you think would be most effective?
Probably the committee meeting would could be more, very, very focused, but we're going to have the EPA here. But it could be, just could really elevate the situation if they're physically here. I mean, they agree to come.
Also, it would take place sooner, by a couple of days. But.
Copy that.
Okay. Want to make a motion to invite FDNY here to address these questions, concerns directly concerning 315 Berry Street.
I make the motion that we invite FDNY to talk about Berry Street.
And I'll second it.
Okay. Steve Chesler, yes. Eric Mercedes?
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you. Trina?
Yes.
Bella?
Yes, she gives the paper.
All right. Comes in at the right time. William Vega?
Affirmative. Yes, copy that. Yes.
Then Laura Hoffman.
Yes.
Okay, that's unanimous. Yes, motion carries. Okay. So
Mr. Chesler, this is going to be for the Environmental Protection Committee, right?
correct. To
Just
sorry, go ahead.
Just to let you know, just the month of December, the only days available is after Christmas, 27, 28, and 29. And then you go into January, which the only day available will be the Wednesday, the 4th.
Okay. All right, I'll work out that meeting date with you offline.
Okay.
I figure, I don't know, 26 will be a tough day to get board members and FDNY to come in. So I think the key is just if we get them even just a few days before that hearing, I think that will be powerful. So
get them on the record.
Yep. Okay. Good job. Good job, committee. All right. Motion to adjourn. Thank you, everyone, for participating in your civic duties. And, have a great week, and see you online.
And for our neighbors, best of holidays coming up.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a
Good
good
night,
night.
everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Joanna.
Thank you,
Have a good
Joanna.
one.
Good night.
You're welcome.